Hello, everyone. I'm here today with King Crocoduck. I hope everyone has had a wonderful Thanksgiving. And we're here today to discuss, I guess, a very contentious issue of what constitutes legitimate or illegitimate national identities. Now, I'm going to kind of frame this a little bit. This obviously has come up in the context of the current Israel-Gaza war that's been going on basically for the last month. Or has it been a month and a half at this stage? I forget exactly how long it's been going on.
About that, yeah.
About that. This is not a war that I have I should say I will have a dog in this fight one way or the other. But it's created a lot of rifts in political discourse. And it oftentimes feels like we're watching two different movies on two different screens. Like the things that I'm seeing seem kind of nuts, and there must be something that I'm missing somewhere along the line. And a lot of people have commented on this, and this is sort of what kind of got our fight or argument or whatever you want to call it online started. Is the most noticeable thing from a right-wing perspective, or from sort of my reactionary perspective, even people who are completely neutral, is that a lot of people that for the last 10 years have been very, very anti-identity politics are suddenly really, really, really on board with identity politics. And it's a very difficult to explain this thing. And this is something that Roaming Millennial commented on when Gad Saad retweeted the set of tweets that were, I don't know, they were very nationalistic for the Jewish identity. And Roman Millennial asked, well, how does this not contradict your previous statements against tribalism and identity politics and all this stuff? And I kind of share Roman Millennial's misunderstanding about this. And I guess I kind of postulated several other identities that might be similar to Jewish identity. If God's believes that Jewish identity is legitimate, I then proposed, let me scroll down here, somehow I lost the link. I proposed several other identities that would be somewhat comparable. I said, for instance, I said German identity could be construed as a similar national identity. English identity could be construed as a similar national identity. White American identity could be construed as a national identity. And white Southern identity could be construed as a national identity, or pan-European identity could as well. And this is sort of the subject of our conversation. And I kind of wanted to see how you felt about this question. What's tribalism? What's identity politics? How does this interface with national identity? And if so, what makes some of these statements legitimate when they don't seem like they would be greeted as legitimate in other contexts?
Yeah, that's a good framing. I think it'll be maybe worthwhile to briefly start out by maybe establishing some common ground, just so we kind of know what our points of agreement are and kind of what motivates the question of national identity before we get tangled in the weeds of what sort of things. Okay, so I think two key problems of modern socio-political organization are basically the following. Number one, you have the apparent unaccountability of power in liberal democratic institutions, wherein managerial and technocratic forces surreptitiously steer society independently of the interests of the political majority. And number two, the isolation and atomization of the polity through mass media and state-sponsored indoctrination. Mm-hmm. And I think these two problems are interrelated. I think the degradation of community and the replacement of authentic collective interests with inauthentic woke interests functions to pacify the polity into compliance, making it unable to effectively resist managerialism and technocratic overreach, and thus enabling the unchecked exercise of political power by unaccountable members of society. So,
that sounds like music to my ears, I guess. It feels like identity politics just kind of works in modern democratic societies, though, right? Like it's a technology that, how can you not use it if it's available to you, right?
There's certainly a very powerful and very pernicious weapon here, and this is something that people who value certain key aspects of liberalism, like I do, need to take stock of and adapt to. But you know, you can kind of separate these two problems, even though they're interrelated. You can separate them and characterize one of these the problem of unaccountability, and the other one the problem of atomization. And my focus, my thinking a lot lately has been about the problem of atomization, particularly because its resolution is a basic precondition for the resolution of the other problem, the problem of unaccountability. And also because the problem of atomization, it's been the subject of a lot of discourse, especially this past year. You know, it stands independently as a central obstacle to the flourishing of human beings. People are complaining all the time about the lack of community and about the consequences that are downstream from this. And, you know, it's a serious problem. And I want, I want Americans, I guess Europeans too. Like I don't have people in Europe, but I'm American, and I want Americans to have community. I want them to be able to enjoy the benefits that I think Zionism has conferred upon Jews in Israel. And I guess kind of my thinking is I want to export the successes of Zionism to America, and if Europeans take these on as well, then of course I'll be pleased with that too.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not a nationalist, but I'm reactionary. So I'm very comfortable with people identifying however they want in terms of their, like, if it's Pan-African or Pan-European or Germanic or whatever. I think that this is something that has to be accommodated, and that it's ordinarily very good, and it's only flaws in our political system that make it bad. Zionism is an interesting, I mean, it seems to me Zionism is intimately connected with this idea of Jewish identity. I mean, it has to be, right?
Yeah, 100%.
Right?
Yeah, certainly. And you know, there was a contention in our thread as to whether it's appropriate to refer to the Jewish identity as fundamentally being a national identity, or whether it's not that. And
see, that's not how we ordinarily use the word, though. You can see, like, Israel is a national identity. Jewish would be like a supranational identity. I'm not saying it's illegitimate, but it just, when I mean, national identity, it means it's getting attached to like a nation state, right? Or
well, I think nations actually precede the existence of nation state. I think nation, the category of nation is actually ancient, even though nationalism and nation state, the ideology associated with that, was born in the modern era. You can talk about the ancient Egyptian nation, you can talk about the Phoenician nation, you can talk about the Assyrian nation. These things did exist in antiquity, and some of these continue to exist into the present day, including, I would contend, the Jewish nation.
Yeah, but now we have a very broad category. I mean, this is, this broad category could encompass any number of things.
Yeah, and I want to kind of, I want to reach some conceptual clarity as to what exactly this category is, and that's kind of the main reason I'm here talking to you today. I want to maybe achieve some synthesis on this.
I mean, so the obvious corollary, I mean, there has been, for the last 1,000 years, there has been a concept of a European identity, and there certainly has been a concept of a Germanic identity, and this has been very political and has at numerous times had national expressions. Now, does that mean that there is a European or Germanic nation in that sense? I would say, by the definitions you've given me so far, and by analogy to the Jewish one, almost certainly.
Okay, so let's maybe back up a little bit and think about kind of what motivates the reason why we care about national identity in the first place. You know, for my own money, I think the purpose of national identity is that it functions as a scalable social adhesive for disparate individuals and families, enabling the expression of a collective interest that facilitates cooperation and sovereignty. Cooperation.
I mean, look, if you do not have a national identity that's strong inside yourself, you're going to be obliterated in the modern world. If identity politics works, group politics is the name of the game. And if you're the only person not defending yourself in the modern world, you're going to get rolled right over.
Right.
And if other people using identity politics and you're not, then you're just going to get tooled.
Right.
In addition to that, people want something that will connect them to their ancestors, genetic and cultural, and connect them to their descendants, cultural and genetic. So if you can find something that fills all three of those bills, people are going to want it.
Well,
and it's not surprising that they're going to want that, right?
I agree with some of what you said, but disagree with some of it as well. I think I first of all, equating identity politics and nationalism, it's fair, but I think that when you're talking about people within the last 10 years who are railing against identity politics, I think there was an implicit understanding that nationalism did not fall under the umbrella of the sort of things they were raging against, right? Like Godsad never swung a bat at the America fuck yeah crowd. And I think, even though the tweet that he retweeted might have been perhaps a little too self-flattering, a little excessive for my own money, there's a kind of charm to the people who say America fuck yeah, and
yeah. I mean, I'll like people give libs of TikTok a bad time, but like a woman defending her people is. I mean, I'm being sexist, but that's what women are supposed to do, right? I mean, that's the most natural response in the entire world, right? That's the most natural response. Yeah, I mean, I have no problem with that. I mean, the difficulty of King Crocoduck is that, the ability to express a national identity outside dedication to particular states for gentile Europeans has been highly curtailed by the media and state apparatuses of modern European and Western countries for the last 80 to 60 years.
Well, let's talk about some
can definitely evidence that if you want me to go into it.
Let's go into some detail about what I think maybe constitutes a national identity, because as I mentioned, if you want it to be robust, you want it to stand up against the nastier variants of identity politics. And for it to serve as a robust social adhesive, it needs to be stable. It has to be able to withstand the test of time, and it has to be robust across geographic space. And this implies that national identity is diachronic and conceptual.
It can't be like I moved to Canada and I lose my national identity. Like my family is half of it lives in Canada, so like that can't be it, right?
Well, I mean, we can hash out the details, but just thinking about the kinds of properties we want for the for what a national identity should be. It ties into the great chain of being, right, in which the past, the present, and future members of the nation are bound together. But the question is what it is that's binding them together. You mentioned genetics. I think
that's always a part of it. I mean, if it's not explicit, it's implicit, right?
I don't think it's either a necessary or sufficient condition, to be honest. And this is going to be controversial even among Jews, but the Jewish nation has recently discovered a problem in that a lot of the people who are born to Jewish families or to families that are nominally Jewish. They're basically Hamas apologists. They're cheering on, all kind or excusing or downplaying all kinds of atrocities against their own people, and there hasn't really been a mechanism to protect against the degradation of the polity by people who get consumed by rabid woke bullshit. And this is kind of a problem. It doesn't really matter that somebody is an heir to a nation. This might not necessarily be a sufficient condition for them to actually be part of the nation. I think fundamentally nationhood is ideological. I think that the great chain of being that binds together the past, present, and future, it consists of a common set of mental states, the details of which can vary in different times and places, but whose essence nevertheless remains constant. And in practice,
most people think that a line of posterity is very, very important, including I could just, and I teach Bible study, and we're going through the Torah right now, aka the first 5 books of the Bible, and genetic lineage is super important to these people, and still is if you listen to a lot of people talk. I'm not saying that you have to have some purity requirement, but looking for a line that connects father to son, father to son, father to son, going back years and years and years. That's very, very, that's very important to a lot of people.
Well, consider Deuteronomic law. There is a conception of illegitimate Jewish children being these being the people who are not in the matrilineal line, but people who are in the patrilineal line. The father to son thing, it literally doesn't apply in Judaism.
Yeah, no, there's exceptions, right? There are exceptions, but it's I mean, I'll put it this way, like the problem I have with genetics is that although you can come up with exceptions to genetics correlating to ethnicity, like it's so highly correlated that even though that there are exceptions, the statistical relationship between the culture and this understanding of history is so linked that I don't see, like, if you come up with a concept of ethnicity, it almost always maps to genetics just on a statistical level. So I don't see why, like, what are we promising? If we promise it's not genetics, like if I have a Germanic nation and the people identify as German, honestly, and not because they're trying to get, advantages somehow, like it'll be mostly people who are genetically German, I would imagine, right?
Sure,
Like
but
99.9%, right? There'll be a few exceptions.
But the explicit expression of a genetic preference, you're including liabilities potentially, and you're excluding assets, and this is the snag for me. For me, I understand the national ethos, the thing that binds the past, present, and future in this great chain of being, to be characterized by solidarity with a differentiated set of symbols, values, history, and culture. And this is something that people can voluntarily assent to or voluntarily repudiate.
Mm-hmm.
So, I recall you mentioning vaguely in one of your videos that you would have more solidarity with, Catholics in South America, a community of Catholic distributists in South America than with like white San Francisco bugmen. And that's the kind of thing that I'm talking about. You want the members of your nation to be bound together by their solidarity with the symbols, values, history, and culture. And if genetics are incidental to that, then this is just a consequence of this more fundamental thing that you're trying to hone in on.
I don't consider posterity to be incidental. I consider being able to see a line of genetics that carries back, even if there's mixing. I consider that to be an important component of cultural transmission. I don't see how, like, almost all cultures have that. They create exceptions, they cut people in under those exceptions, but like they all consider that to be important in most ordinary cases, and I don't see how that can be discounted from this. So I'm not really somebody who is all about purity, but the line, so to speak, in terms of father to son, father to son, father to son, that transmission mechanism is important in almost all cultures. And it certainly is important in most Jewish cultures, although there are exceptions. But I mean, the reason why, I mean, there are adopted sons of like Roman empires who were like, they're out groups and they do amazing. Like there was an Arab, wasn't there Philip the Arab was a Roman Empire or whatever, or emperor at some point. I don't know if he was entirely Arab, but you get the idea. But the problem we're dealing with right now is not these countries like Germany and Ireland are having existential crises right now. It's not because they're potentially excluding people who want to be part of their culture. It's because they're importing millions and millions and millions and millions of people into their culture under the idea that they will all be exceptions.
I agree.
Assimilation is an individual experience that occurs very, very rarely. And all of these countries are treating this individual rare experience like it's going to be the ordinary course of action of virtually everyone who enters the country, which of course it will not be.
Okay, I think this is a good articulation of the problem. But I don't think it necessarily entails that there be an explicit genetic criteria for a national identity. I think that you can still, like, as a consequence, yeah, you're gonna have people of a certain lineage. Just if we preserve the existence of families, which I presume we both want to do, then this is just gonna be a consequence of that. But
yeah, but there's not taking into consideration race, and there's not taking into consideration race, right? There's like not taking into consideration of race like Israel used to do, where like their requirements were so heavily coded culturally that only genetic Jews would ever try to fulfill those requirements. And then there's race doesn't matter the way that Germany does it, which is like you're assumed to be assimilating until someone proves that you're not. I mean, like, so like you could drive a pickup truck through these. Like the way that Israel does it, it will preserve their genetic legacy, even if genetic legacy isn't part of the explicit requirements. And
I think that
sometimes it is in modern Israel.
I don't agree with that. I think that wherever genetic testing is done, this is done in cases where, like, for example, somebody lost their documents during the Holocaust, and as a
Why
result,
would you
like,
need to genetically test if genetics is a component?
sorry.
Why
Oh,
would you need to genetically test?
Because it would support the claim that you do have the Jewish heritage, and the presumption, the reason why
Why would
you
genetics confirm that?
well, there's a presumption, and it's as I mentioned a moment ago,
But
it's possibly a mistaken presumption. Don't laugh, David. This is important. There's a
no, but
presumption.
it's
Just hear me out, Dave.
statistics.
Dave, hear me out. There's a presumption that the relation between parent and child is going to be one that necessarily preserves the national character, and this is not always the case. People do become shitlibs. They do end up betraying their nation, and if you don't have a mechanism to protect against that, your own quote unquote people, who you've included on the basis of their genetics, they become the worst enemies of your nation. I would take one Thomas Sowell over 10 Matt McManus, whatever, however the hell you say his name.
But look, but here's the thing. I mean, like, statistically, like, this is, if I have an African who's assimilated, right, like, he's 100% into German culture because it's like his thing. Like, he has a son who's African. That son is not necessarily going to, like, love Goethe, right? So the probability of him reverting to thinking of himself as African and not German is, like, orders of magnitude higher. And, like, I can say that, okay, like,
That's
what
not
matters
in his
is
genes,
history.
Dave.
Well, it doesn't matter if it's in his genes or not. It might actually have a genetic component. I'm not ruling that out.
Well,
but
what
it doesn't
there
matter because, like, the reality is that there's going to be a reversion to the type, because the adherence that the father had to German culture was an extension of an individual fascination, and not something that was broadly transmissible and more difficult to transmit because there was that racial difference.
Okay, well, I think there's a difference in our understanding of the nature of the civilizational struggle we're engaged in, and to best illustrate this, I want to offer you the good ending versus the bad ending. So the good ending is you die, as we all do in the end, good or bad, and your great grandchildren visit your grave. Your great grandchildren might share your race, they might not. But your grave is well kept, and they go to your grave and they reflect on the values and the symbols and the history and the culture that you loved and that you propagated. And your life meant something. They value that, they respect you for it, and they pass it forward to their descendants, regardless of whether or not they share your race. That's the good ending. The bad ending is your great grandchildren go to your grave, and we're assuming they know or care where you're buried, and your grave is unkempt and dilapidated. And in this bad ending, they blame all of their problems on you. The reason why they're isolated and alienated and miserable is because you're a straight white male colonialist, blah, blah, fucking blah. And the dominant ideology gives them permission to spit on your grave. That's the bad ending. Regardless of whether they share your race or not.
So do you see how race, even if I don't concede that that your good ending, bad ending entirely encompasses my concerns, but even if I were to agree that those were the totality of the objectives, and even if race is only skin deep, which I do not concede because I think there's a lot of evidence that it's not, the racial dimension will still make the type 2 ending more probable for a variety of reasons, just based on how people's natural incentives work. For instance, let's say that Germany's population is completely replaced by sub-Saharan Africans, right? There is no way that a new sub-Saharan ruling majority in Africa will look back on the history of Germany and not be distinctly aware that they are a separate racial people than the people than Goethe and the people who built the Cologne Cathedral and the people who Mozart and all those other great German engineers, right? Well, Mozart was a musician. They will be distinctly aware that they are separate people, and there will be an implicit incentive there to develop a mythology about how the people that were there before them were bad.
The Jews don't have this problem. The Jews don't have this in
They
Israel.
don't.
They don't.
They definitely have this problem.
No, in Israel, everyone is a Jew, regardless of whether they're black, white, Middle Eastern, or whatever. In fact, the Mizrahim and the Sephardim, your Middle Eastern and African Jews, they're more right wing and more Zionist and more conservative than the white Ashkenazim.
Okay, but so this you don't see that there would be a problem if there would be. I mean, first of all, the percentage of the Israeli population falls almost entirely into two camps, which is Ashkenazi and Sephardic. There is a 3% admixture of Ethiopian Jews, and then the rest of the population is like Arabic or Muslim or Maronite Christian or whatever.
The majority the majority are non-Ashkenazi.
Yeah, but that's Sephardic, right? So they fall into one of two categories. Like Sephardic, meaning broadly Middle Eastern, and then the rest would be European Jews that I broadly call Ashkenazi.
Right.
Okay, so I mean the distinct racial problem. That's 3% of that's about that's a fourth of the percentage of Black Americans in America, and a tenth of the amount of non-white people in America. It's minuscule.
But we're discounting the Middle Eastern people here. I mean, are you more comfortable with your descendants being Middle Eastern than African, or how's this working?
Well, I'm concerned. You're talking about me, like it's my personal concern. People are concerned about having their cultures wiped out and being portrayed as the villains of history. Okay. This is absolutely a problem that Jews should be able to understand. Maybe not internally, but certainly externally. And we can pretend like we don't see this problem, but you see this problem.
But which problem?
Okay. If you if you doubled, like if Israel was imminently going to become African, and you were just going to like, okay, well, we'll just convert them to Judaism or whatever. We'll just declare them Jews at the border.
Well, so no, that's not how it works.
But why doesn't it work that way?
No, because becoming a Jew is a year-long at least a year-long process, well, and the national identity. Change it? No, listen. The national identity is contained within the Orthodox Jewish religion, and this is why people who convert to Judaism automatically get citizenship in Israel. But it's a year-long process.
Israel does not gate its process of citizenship to Orthodox Jews. I know enough about Israel to know that.
Oh, sorry, say again?
Israel does not gate its immigration process exclusively to Orthodox Jews.
Yeah, I know. I was the one who told you this. But what I'm saying is the people who get in through the law.
I knew that before.
Okay.
You could just, you could, okay, like, let's say me, I could just declare myself a secular Jew, right? Like there's a whole movement. I don't know if you're on the East Coast, or I think you're on the West Coast. But in the East Coast, like there's this huge movement of African Americans that call themselves Black Israelis. Have you heard of these guys?
Yeah, and in fact, Israel accidentally let a bunch of them in, and it became.
What's accidental about it?
Well, it was accidental
why
because
why is that accidental?
Dave, you gotta let me answer your questions. It was accidental because they didn't realize that these people are not actually Jews. That these are vicious, because they're vicious anti-Semites who think that Jews stole their identity from them. But here's the moral of the story. They actually did end up assimilating. This group of vicious anti-Semites actually did end up grafting themselves onto the Jewish nation.
Then there's no problem. So what if you had an entire nation of Nigeria do that, and you could have the native Sephardic and Ashkenazi Jews be a minority?
Well, like I said, as long as the national ethos is preserved, as long as the symbols, value, history, and culture are preserved, then it's not a problem. It's only a problem if it becomes bastardized and ruined.
You'd make that bet?
Make what bet?
You bet if I converted Nigeria to be the type of Jews that were Black Israelites in like New York right now.
Oh no. Israel's
completely subsumed your culture demographic. Yeah, they turn around and
Israel's not going to roll those dice again, because that was like I said, it was a South Park episode.
Okay, great, but why?
But listen, David, you gotta just let me talk.
The nature, like you're implicitly hinting that you understand the danger that this poses. right?
The
If you didn't
danger is
understand the danger, you would
is
not.
ideological. Dave, the danger is ideological. Okay, Noam Chomsky is not allowed in Israel for the same reason
But
that
this
Black Hebrew
individually
Israelites.
blacklisted him, right? But that's fine. Like you individually blacklist people.
Okay,
But
but
I'm talking about a
okay,
broader category.
yeah, Dave, what I'm trying to get through to you here is that the national ethos is the thing that defines one's membership in the nation. It's fundamentally about your solidarity with the symbols, values, history, and culture. If you have it, then great, you're in. If you don't, then get out.
How I
That's
don't.
what a properly functioning nationalism entails.
But the thing is, King Crocoduck, I could just lie about that, right? Like if you like, oh yeah, I love Germany, and so let me into Germany, or I
That's
love
not how it
Israel.
works in Israel. In Israel, you got to go through a process. You can't just BS your way in. Like the bar is set a lot higher than here in America, where all you have to do is pass not even an AP level exam, but just like you said, you know, the bar isn't high enough. And I agree. This is a problem that has to be addressed in America. And I want
But
America
this bar would
to be.
exclude virtually. It would be a racial bar implicitly, if not explicitly.
We could argue that point, but you know, fundamentally, for me, it is an ideological matter. I think people do need to have loyalty to the nation, at least expressed at least in these terms.
Like I'm German. Do I embody the ethos of Germany or Germanic peoples?
Well, let's talk a little bit about the ethos. I haven't really we haven't really touched upon kind of what kind of attributes we would expect to be necessary for a national ethos. I mean, you know, we could throw around.
Yeah, it seems impossible to define.
Let's make the impossible possible then. Let's talk about some of the attributes that allow a national ethos to be sufficiently robust across space and time to qualify as a national identity. And I think there are 6 attributes that define the essence of a nation. So the first one is a collective proper name. This one's easy. If you don't have a name, then you don't have an identity.
You guys make up one up on the fly, right?
No.
Why
No,
not?
Sorry, what?
Why not?
Did you ask if I'm making these up on the fly?
Why could you not make up a name for a people just like right now, right?
Because people have to assent to it. It's a
Is
collective.
African a collective ethos? Like Pan-African.
I mean, if all Africans assent to it, then sure. Or sorry, if Africans collectively assent. Not all of them. Let's say sufficient.
There's not going to be a vote. This will never happen, right?
Dave, a sufficient plural. Fine. This criteria is satisfied. But you know, I said there's 6, and that's one. And this is a simple
sorry.
one.
Go.
Right?
We'll go through them. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
Second, a myth of common ancestry. So that great chain of being which connects past to present to future. How did it begin? What was the origin of our common national ethos?
Ancestry. Yes, I agree. That would be important for most people to have a genetic line going back. So I agree. Go ahead.
A myth of common ancestry. So the nature of that ancestry need not necessarily be genetic. It could be ideological.
I always love it when myths are true. But number 3.
I mean, Dave, do you want to have a conversation or like what's going on here?
You said you want a concept of common ancestry. I said, yeah, that's great. A myth of common ancestry would help if the myth is true, but if we want it to be false, it could be false too, right?
Sure. What I'm talking about is the origin of the national ethos. How did the nation begin?
Yeah, I mean,
okay.
Sure.
Okay. So third, shared historical memories. So which links within the great chain of being are especially important to that chain as a whole, right? Which historical characters and events are we commemorating as a reminder of who we are, which virtues we uphold, and where we came from? Number 4, elements of common culture which differentiate the nation. So which properties of our chain of being distinguish it from other chains of being? Number 5, association with a common homeland. So where was the national identity born? To which land do we, physical beings in physical space, belong by virtue of the historical connection between the birthplace of the national ethos and the ongoing subscription to that ethos which propagated from generation to generation down the great chain of being? And 6, collective solidarity. Are we ideologically bound, at least to some degree, to the symbols, values, history, and culture of those who belong to the great chain of being? And if not, then we're not part of the nation. And each of these attributes... Sorry, what? Yeah, that's 6.
I mean, so 6 is the 6 that people have been collectively had solidarity to this in the past, or that they could in the future?
Well, each of these attributes functions as ideological scaffolding, and the degree to which these attributes are present in a national ethos is the degree to which the national identity is robust and inoculated to threats, both within and without. So wherever the national identity appears to have been degraded, as I believe it has by state and corporate interests for the purpose of neutralizing collective political action in opposition to managerial technocracy, it seems natural to assume that the appropriate remedy is to revitalize the national identity by strengthening whichever elements of the national ethos have been weakened.
Someone's informing me that my microphone's bad, so okay, let's see if I can't fix this. I don't know if I can fix this right now, but let's see. Sound better? Can you hear me?
Yeah, that sounds fine on my end.
I'll switch to this then. Okay, so I guess all pretty much any group of people could claim these things as I mean, almost any group of people could claim these things to be true about them, right?
Well, let's talk some examples. You know, the subject is European national identity, and you know, I do want I do want different peoples to have to be able to benefit from all of the nice things that collective communities have to offer, and that national identity in particular will have to offer.
Okay, but with Pan-Africanism, I could kind of disclaim that all of these things, like name, African.
Okay.
You know, does that have a myth of ancestry? Well, there's lots of, you know, we all came from Africa. There's the myth. Shared historic memory. I mean, not exactly, really, but you know, you could make something up, right? Like, you know, the Pan-African movement actually did claim that there was a shared historical memory of Africa.
Okay, let's say that's true.
Elements of common culture, you know, sub-Saharan African cultures do have things in common. It's very diverse.
But what
association with homeland, Africa,
solidarity
against colonialism.
The elements of common culture, the elements of common culture which differentiate the nation, they have to differentiate the nation from other nations. So like whatever it is they have in common, it can't just be like, you know, they enjoy, I don't know, they enjoy barbecue, right? That's not a distinctly African characteristic. There has to be some element in the common culture that differentiates this Pan-African movement from rival nations.
I mean, you're gonna have elements of African culture that are common to sub-Saharan Africa and that are uncommon elsewhere, or virtually uncommon elsewhere. People in common areas will. I mean, does Asian, like, if you were to say, like, are there common elements of Japanese, Korean, and Chinese culture? Yes, right.
Well, so something a little bit more substantial than like consumer pop culture stuff. I'm talking about like national holidays and things like that.
Well, I mean,
national holidays
are largely religious.
They can have a religious component, but sure.
99% of all holidays will be religious inside a traditional society.
They can have a religious component, but you can often separate the religious from the secular.
What's a non-religious Jewish holiday that all three Jewish categories have in common?
Good question.
Is there any?
Yeah, there was
non-religious one.
A non-religious one. Give me a second. I'm looking through the list here. You can
coming to mind.
What you can do is you can separate the religious component from the secular component, and this is true of all of them. But there are those that are explicitly secular that have no religious component whatsoever. There's the fast of, what was his name? Began with a G. Give me one sec here.
Okay, but what is the secular? The fast sounds religious.
Yeah, one sec.
Most.
Here it is. Fast of. Hold on, I lost it. Give me one sec here.
Okay, so let's do Europeans, right?
Wait, hold on. I want to give you the example. So off the top of my head, Purim is an the Fast of Gedalia.
Purim is religious. Purim is definitely religious.
Nah, it literally commemorates the one time a sexy Jewish lady saved the whole nation from
That's the book of
anti-Semites by
Esther.
being
That's
sexy.
literally in the Bible.
Yeah, and that is the book in the Bible that doesn't make any mention of God whatsoever. You can read the book of Esther. It offers no prescription of religious holidays. It's literally just a historical document, or perhaps a mythological document telling a story about something that happened to the Jewish nation. The word God, the word Lord, it doesn't appear at all in there.
So it's not if it's not religious, if the celebration does not directly reference God, then it's not religious.
Do you disagree with that?
I would have always assumed that Purim was religious because it's a religious text and it's held up as a sacred text by most religions.
The book of Esther is literally just telling the story of a sexy lady who saved the nation from anti-Semites by being sexy.
I've read the story. It's a great story. No, I know. It's a great story.
It's literally the Jews coming up with the Khazar milkers meme 2,000 years before you guys did.
Okay. But you're aware that Christians have like a variety of Christmas celebrations that aren't particularly they're obviously like half the celebrations in Christmas are like they're religious, but they don't directly mention God. So those are secular, right?
Yeah, and there's the Fast of Gedalia, which commemorated the assassination of the governor of Judah, and whose death marked the end of Jewish national autonomy prior to the Babylonian exile. So
well, I mean, it's like Hanukkah too. Hanukkah is not even in the Bible, right? I mean, like that's beating up the Seleucid Empire or whatever, right? But
yeah, Hanukkah commemorates the successful revolt of the I can never pronounce this right. Is it Maccabees or Maccabees?
The Maccabees, I believe. But if Hanukkah is not religious, then a lot of Christian holidays that we associate with things like Easter and Christmas, like Mardi Gras and Christmas celebrations like Saint Nick stuff, that's all not religious too, right?
Well, look, Dave, they can have.
I can rope in all of Europe.
Dave, right? They can have a religious component, but you can separate that out and just leave behind the secular component. Now, whether there's a secular national component to it is a separate question, because Christianity doesn't appear to have any inherently national characteristics in the way Judaism does. In fact, I would make the case that when you secularize Christianity, you don't get anything resembling nationalism. You get, frankly, communism. Whereas when you secularize Judaism, whereas when you secularize Judaism, you get nationalism in the form of Zionism.
Yeah, I mean, that's because okay, this has to also kind of be something we understand here too. Like your standards for nationalism can't be like, I feel it would be unfair to create a standard of nationalism that makes it seem that all like Muslim and Christian nations don't exist, and then like the Jewish nation does.
Well, these nations,
these nations, it's ridiculous. Like I know that the Jewish faith is intimately linked to the ethnicities of Ashkenazi and Sephardic Jews, and to some degree the Ethiopian ones as well. Like I understand that
it's intimately linked to the homeland and to the national organization of the people.
Okay, but most other religions don't do that. So if your standards of nationalism are going to be deeply connected to that kind of link in like, if every Jewish religion is a national religion because it links to the homeland, you're not going to find those kind of links to the homeland in Hinduism or Buddhism or Christianity or any other religion. So like the standard already is sort of biased to make it seem like the thickness of the Jewish nationalism is stronger than it would be for any other Christian nation, right?
Well, that is only true by virtue of two things. Number one, the fact that the Jewish nation is older than any Christian nation. And number two, the fact that Christian nations, they're national for reasons that are independent of their Christianity. Their Christianity may contribute to their national character, but their Christianity is not the basis of their national character.
But this makes it so that by your criteria, Christian nations will have a harder time defining themselves as nations, because their national holidays will be predominantly shared by other people, whereas the Jewish nation's holidays will be exclusive to themselves.
What do you mean by shared with other people? Oh, do you mean like
because Christians, like, so
And
I get you. So like Christmas is celebrated worldwide. Yeah. So so Christmas. Yeah. Christmas.
Not most of the Christian holidays will be too, right?
Yeah. So these things are international holidays. What I'm saying is a nation can be characterized as Christian, but the elements that that make that nation differentiated from other nations is not going to be its Christianity. It's going to be other aspects that are particular to that nation. Its symbols, its history, things that are distinct from these internationalist religions like Christianity and Islam.
But this criteria, so the thing is that this criteria would make it so that it seems that the Christian countries qualify less for this, right?
No. If countries are majority Christian or if they're run by Christian parties or whatever, provided that they satisfy the other criteria. I mean, the Christianity doesn't dilute their claim to having national sovereignty or their claim to having a national identity. As far as I'm concerned,
you said the national identity was largely dependent on you having like festivals and holidays that were different than the other peoples that it was defined against.
Right, and those festivals and holidays, they don't necessarily have to be of a Christian character, right? A nation can have festivals and holidays that don't derive from Christianity. They're not celebrated. Or alternatively,
99% of all holidays will be the religious ones.
Well, Dave, alternatively, you can put a spin on a formerly religious holiday and make it particularly national and one that can separate the religious component from the secular component. Like in America, Thanksgiving, right? Thanksgiving began as an explicitly Christian tradition, but it developed into it has there's a distinctly American Thanksgiving, right? That has its own particular national character. Like you said in your recent stream, it can't be goose, it has to be turkey, right? It has to be the American bird. That's the kind of thing I'm talking about.
To be part of like a new ethnogenesis, if there was one in America.
Right.
But I wouldn't use that as a, this would provide a very poor, like if I was admitting an immigrant and I'm like, well, would you celebrate Thanksgiving? They'll always say yes, right? And no one's going to say no to that, right?
Well, I mean, it's not the only criterion, but if we were to construct a thicker version of American national identity, I think that one of the things that you'd have to do is you'd have to take a look at all of the holidays and you'd have to consider what kind of virtues are being promoted and what aspect of the American national character is being endorsed by these holidays. I mean,
I think we waved bye-bye to that a long time ago.
Okay, yeah, sure. And what I'm suggesting is a revitalization of the national character, of the national identity, could be an effective weapon to wield against people who are abusing identity politics of other varieties.
But I mean, I still don't quite understand this, though. I mean, using your criteria, I could certainly say pan-Europeanism was like, if I just take Europe as a whole.
Okay, go for it.
Like it's as thick as America is.
Go for it.
Name Europe.
Okay.
Myth of origin. Well, there's literally a myth of Europe, and there were multiple 19th century. Well, I mean, how much it has to be a myth?
I mean,
there was this whole. I mean, I'm sure you're aware of this, but there was this whole like all of these myths of like Aryan invasions of the 19th century that were very, very popular among like the Wagner and Fichte and all that stuff.
I'm sure you're aware of these myths, right? Let me give you a sense of the sort of thing I'm talking about. Again, turning back,
myth, right? It's supposed to be a myth, right?
Well, turning back to Thanksgiving, for example, right? We know there was a Thanksgiving when the Pilgrims arrived, but it's been heavily mythologized, especially in the popular media, where we imagine, pilgrims sitting down with the local Native Americans, and they're enjoying this meal, and they live peacefully, happily ever after. And this mythology endorses certain virtues that, even though they might not necessarily have been lived up to historically, they're virtues that might characterize the type of nation that we want to have. These are people who brought their Christian, their European traditions with them. They came to America and they modified these traditions in a fashion that incorporated this new ethnos that they were adopting. In some sense, Thanksgiving is a kind of foundational mythology to the American national identity.
Okay, but this has to be a myth, right? Like there's multiple myths of Europe's creation. There's the myth of the Roman
Empire. What I'm trying to get across.
The myths of
what I'm trying to get across is the symbolism. There has to be something symbolic that people can attach themselves to. It can't just be like a cute little story. Like there has to be something that can be propagated forward to future
Thanksgiving is a
generations
cute
that
little
means
story,
something.
though, right?
It is a cute little story, but it's also there's also symbolism, deep symbolism that can be drawn from it that can bind people together and help create and foster the type of communities that we want to build.
Europe has been conceptualizing itself as a single entity for about 1,000 years. You would call it like Christendom before that, but it's been more or less the same group. There's a genetic commonality in this group, and there's multiple stories about how this group emerged. And certainly the ambition of every European ruler for the last 1,000 years has been to reconstitute all of Europe under their singular rulership, to create a pan-European polity like the Roman Empire. That seems to constitute to me a myth of common ancestry and a myth of commonality.
I mean, are you proud of the current execution of this in the form of the European Union?
I am not, but the fact that it's going on is pretty much proof positive that it exists as a conscious element.
I mean, look, Dave, I'm not opposed to the possibility of a pan-European national identity. All right, I'm just trying to understand, kind of get a higher resolution picture of the types of properties that it has. And this maybe just comes down to my own historical ignorance, because I don't know the history of Europe as well as, say, the history of America or whatever. But you know, as long as these 6 criteria are satisfied, and do so in a fashion that really get the people together, that allows these communities to be fostered and allows for the development of all the kinds of nice things that we want. I don't have a problem with it. Just to satisfy the 6 criteria, and you're good to go. But that's fundamentally where I was coming from with our set of tweets, our set of back and forth.
No, I'm totally cool. I don't mean to be aggressive, King Crocoduck. I mean, my concern is that I don't think that that's what people's concern. That the fear is obviously that if European and European Americans develop a collective social conscience, that they're going to be furious at what's happened over the last 100 years, right? And they're going to seek vengeance. That's what I'm not trying to like accuse you of anything, but that's why European identity politics is so heavily suppressed, both here and in Europe. There, that's
you're talking about white nationalism.
You can call it whatever you want.
I mean, I'm distinguishing.
Would it be different?
I'm distinguishing European national identity from whatever white national identity is supposed to be. I understand. I mean, we talk about white national identity. I don't think white national identity will satisfy these 6 criteria, whereas something like European national identity potentially could.
What's the difference?
The difference, not all white people
and white are used almost synonymously where I come from.
Yeah, not all Europeans are white. Not all whites are European. I mean, like this goes back to the genetic thing we were talking
about, like Greeks and Armenians. I mean, most people historically have considered Greeks and Armenians to be European, even though they're not technically in Europe and have sometimes darker skins, right?
What about Turks?
No.
Well, okay, they're part of the European Union.
Well, it doesn't matter. They're not considered European peoples. They never have been. They never have historically, and modern Europeans don't.
All right. What I'm trying to say is, white as a nation, it doesn't seem to satisfy the kinds of criteria, the ethno symbolism that I'm trying to endorse. Which is why
is the problem really that it's just not thick enough?
Well, yeah, it seems that white national identity has always just defined itself in terms of its opposition to everything that isn't white, or that it doesn't conceive as white. It doesn't actually conceive of itself in terms of what it loves. Would you say the same thing
for German nationalism?
Not necessarily. It didn't have to be. In fact, there was a Jewish physicist. He was the guy. His name was Schwarzschild, and he was the guy who came up with the idea of black holes based on Einstein's general theory of relativity. And he was a Jewish German nationalist who fought in World War I proudly for his country. So it doesn't necessarily have to be that way. But for historically contingent reasons, it did turn out to be that way. And I'm not opposed to the possibility of a German national identity, right? If Germany started adopting a thicker conception of what it means to be German, I'm not opposed to that. What I'm
Well, this would
opposed
be
to,
broader than that, right? This would be all people of German descent in all countries coming,
What-
like
what-
like the Jewish one, right? This would be German Americans suddenly, like, and that would be most white Americans, right? Like virtually all of them.
I mean, what I'm opposed to is people defining themselves in terms of what they're not. People becoming echoes of echoes instead of defining themselves in terms of what they love. And I lay out these 6 criteria because they allow you to define yourself in terms of a collective that you love instead of defining yourself in opposition to what you hate.
I mean, I'll say this. I mean, like, the obvious boogeyman of the last 100 years is the Third Reich.
Okay.
The Third Reich was led by somebody who I think was kind of an unstable maniac, Hitler.
I mean, I would tend to agree, yeah.
The identity of Germanness in the Third Reich was not negative. For Hitler, it was very obsessed on the negative of being not Jewish. But for virtually everybody else, and for the last 100 years before Hitler, German identity was very, very rooted in positive affirmations of Germanness. And that carried over to the Third Reich as well. So, I mean,
I mean, the Third Reich. It seems to me that even if that love of nation, that love of people was there, it seems to me that a substantial proportion of what it meant to be a German was defined in terms of their opposition to to everybody else. Even if it wasn't like the only thing that was a part of their identity, it was still a fundamental part of their identity. It seems impossible to dispute that.
Well, I would certainly dispute that. That German identity was an opposition to everyone else.
In during the Third Reich, that during the Third Reich, the German national identity, as it existed in that place and time in history, was not fundamentally opposed to, for example, Jews.
Well, I mean, it was certainly opposed to Jews because of Hitler and because of a variety of other thinkers.
Right. But this is not something that's essential. This is not something that's essential to German national identity. We can conceive of German national identity as loving Goethe. I'm butchering his name, I know, but whatever. You can conceive of it in terms of love of Beethoven, love of all of these cultural art, the mythologies, historical figures, the philosophers, Kant, and if you must, Hegel. I don't know why you would love him, but sure, Hegel. Right.
Well, actually, no. Fichte was the one of the founders of German nationalism.
Careful.
Do you know that?
Fichte.
It's Fichte.
Yeah.
I thought it was Fichte.
No.
Okay. Well, that's my mispronunciation. Okay. Well, Fichte was then was the founder of German nationalism. Was considered one of the fathers of German nationalism.
Okay, cool. So, yeah, and you can admit other Germans into other questionable Germans. Karl Marx. They could all be part of your history, and you could take pride in all of that. Fine, but the question is: are you defining yourself in terms of what you love, or in opposition to what you hate? You seem to be endorsing the view that the Germans ought to define themselves in terms of what they love, and I say go for it. That seems like a perfectly reasonable conception for what a national identity could be. If it's robust, if it's thick, if it satisfies the 6 criteria, which I don't see why it wouldn't, I'm perfectly fine with it.
Well, I mean, I think every group would satisfy the 6 criteria if you let them define it in their own terms, right?
I don't think that a white nationalist could make the case that the white nation, the International Confederation of Whites, satisfies these 6 criteria.
A Southern nationalist certainly could.
A what?
A Southern nationalist certainly could.
A Southern nationalist
certainly could. WASPs certainly could. Actually, as a matter of fact, I don't know of an origin story for America that isn't WASP. I know 3 WASP origin stories, and I don't know a single non-WASP one. And I'm not a WASP. I'm at best an Ellis Islander. So, if you modulate this a little bit, you could easily derive white American as an ethnic identity, right?
To the degree that it could, I mean, I would have to see, I would have to see it point by point. My suspicion is that if we were to get into the weeds of it, if we were to look at the degree to which the 6 criteria are satisfied, I think there would be a lot of straw grasping for at least some of these. I don't think it would constitute a thick conception of national identity.
Why would we try to manage it this way? Isn't the danger of identity politics and how it's politically expressed not in whether it meets criteria of being like historically valid, right? I mean,
well, the entire point of having these criteria in the first place is because we want a national ethos to be sufficiently robust across space and time to be able to withstand the weaponization of other kinds of identity politics, and also to be able to foster community building.
Well, I mean, if you want people to feel like this about their nation, you've got to stop mass migration like pronto. Because it's probably already killed it at this stage, right? I mean, what are these 6 criteria for America? We have a name. We certainly don't have a myth of a common ancestry. We certainly do not have a shared historic memory.
I would say that the myth of common ancestry begins with Thanksgiving.
African Americans don't see themselves in the basis of the Puritans.
Depends on the person. Like, the way I've conceived of it is in terms of symbols, values, history, and culture. So when I use the word ancestry, I'm not talking about like literal genetic ancestry. I'm not talking about the people who founded the country where your great whatever. I'm talking about their values being your values. I'm talking about the birth of that thing that we call the nation. It begins at this point in time with Thanksgiving, and the values and symbols in history are continuous down the generations, down the great chain of being to the present day.
What's important is the story people tell about how their people develop, not like the literal bird they. I mean, I said that we had to be Turkey, but it has to be Turkey to connect them to the story. If African,
it has to be Turkey to connect it to America.
No, but if African Americans tell themselves the story about how, the Puritans didn't enslave them, but I've heard various Black nationalist versions of this myth that had the Puritans do this, even though it's not historically accurate. If the African American story is that the Puritans were their slave masters, they can eat as much turkey as they want. That holiday is not going to accomplish.
Yeah. So the ideology. Yeah. The ideology needs to change. Right, like the entire idea, the project that I have in mind is giving people a thicker conception of their national identity by changing the ideology that they subscribe to, so that they can have this common basis of national identity that will allow them to cooperate across all of these divides. We can all begin speaking the same cultural language, the same symbolic and value-based and history-laden language.
I don't see how we could produce that. I feel like we just have to kind of split things up or something, or let people organize themselves.
Well, I think that's probably just a point of impasse between us. I mean, I'm not for partitioning the United States, among the Southern nationalists on the one hand and Black people on the or whatever. Like, I think there is such a thing as an American national identity, and that a revitalization of that national identity along these 6 criteria, modulating them so that it becomes ideologically stronger for the polity, is feasible and should be pursued. But if you disagree with that, then it is what it is.
For America, I wouldn't promote partition. I think American government is fundamentally unstable, so something is going to have to change radically inside this. But there's no common narrative about America's origin or even its goodness right now. And so I think that the only way I could see us handling it is just let people use freedom of association to be with.
We seem to be mixing up the descriptive and the prescriptive. I agree. Right now, it's kind of a shitty situation, but the preservation of the national identity through difficult circumstances is not something that's impossible. The Jews did it quite well on multiple occasions, in fact.
Can you phrase that again? I mean, like you're talking about like the religious group, the Jews.
I'm talking about the nation. The Jewish nation was able to preserve its national identity through difficult circumstances. This was true during the first Babylonian exile. It was true through the second Roman exile, and it remained true through all the difficult times ever since. The Jewish national identity was able to persevere through difficult times, and you'll like the fact that the mechanism that they used to preserve the national identity was their religion while they were in exile.
Yeah.
Religion. When you're in exile, let me do kind of a wacky analogy, right? The state, the place, the territory where your nation is located, and the set of administrative and military apparatuses that nominally executes the will of the nation. That's your house. That's your home. And if you're kicked out of your house, you've got this magical little briefcase called religion, which acts as a kind of TARDIS that you can stuff your house inside of, and you can go around. And you know, if you got to sleep rough like 100 blocks away, and you know, rest your head on this magical briefcase like a pillow, you know you're resting your head against your home, and you know you engage in whatever rituals and traditions you need to over the time period in which you're away from that territory where your house was located, until eventually you go back, you unpack this magical briefcase religion where your house, the nation, was located, the state was located, and there you go, you've preserved your national identity.
But most other religions don't work like this. Most other religions are confessional. There's no such thing as like atheist Islam or atheist Christianity. There is, but like atheist Islam is like Baathism, and atheist Christianity is like the insane progressive stuff.
But what I'm saying is, in principle, we could imagine, and I know this is kind of wacky, but as an analogy, let's say for the sake of argument, for whatever reason, the American empire collapsed, right? And we suddenly found ourselves stateless. In principle, what you could do is you could create a religion. You could create the cult of America, and it could be associated with a whole set of religious traditions. And you could send Americans out into the diaspora, the American diaspora, all over the world. And as long as they maintained these cultural and traditional practices that maintained their national identity through the religious practice of the cult of America, there could eventually come a point where they would be able to reconstitute themselves in the nation or in the country following the end of the exile. I don't think we're quite there. I don't think we're at a point where we need to be exiled and put America in a religious briefcase and then hope that someday things will get. What I'm trying to illustrate is they're very
good.
Well, they're very. I'm not gonna lie. The circumstances are kind of shit, but I don't think that it's so hopeless that nationalism can't be used to facilitate a kind of healing process where everybody gets put on the same kind of nationalistic baseline. And we now are able to have cultural conversation. We're able to exchange symbols and values and history and culture. We can all be one people.
But are we one people? I don't believe.
Not right now.
I respect African Americans distinctly, but they're not the same people as I am. They don't think I'm the same people as they are.
Not right now, but they can be. This is fundamentally a matter of ideology.
Well, I mean, the one thing we kind of have in common is religion, but if that's not going to be explicit, then I don't really know, you know. The problem with America is that you've got people who are very, very racially divided. And then you've got people who are very religiously divided. So none of the poles work at the same time.
Yeah,
if you tell me that America means Christianity, then all of a sudden the links with African Americans become stronger, but the weak links with other groups become weaker or non-existent.
What you have is multiple Americas, effectively. And these multiple Americas are a function of the different ideologies that are held by different people. And it seems to me that the solution is to merge them into a single America by merging, or better yet, having one ideology dominate the rest. That is going to happen one way or the other. What I'm saying is it had better be an ideology that can go to bat against woke ideology. And I claim that a nationalistic ideology, a thicker conception of the American national character, is what's necessary to be able to produce something like that.
I think woke ideology is an expression of America's core religious identity. It's just a very twisted one.
Seems to me like woke ideology is like more like third world nationalism combined with some internationalist nonsense.
Woke ideology does not come from the third world. It comes from America and Europe.
It does, but third world nationalism doesn't come from the third world either. They imported these ideas and from America and Europe in order to produce their idea, which is ironic.
In the third world nationalism actually looks like nationalism. Third world nationalism in America looks like race communism, right?
Let me put it this way: communism is always secretly somebody else's nationalism. Right.
I would agree with that.
Okay. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. What appears to be race communism is actually third world nationalism pretending to be an international movement.
Yes, there were a lot of people saying this throughout the course of the 20th century. That is a very common statement. I'm thinking of a few people who said similar things to that, but I won't bring them up. I kind of agree with that, but when you take communism, I mean, progressivism is the religion of sort of this like Unitarian, like Puritan class that's twisted through secular lenses.
Well, that's not a briefcase we have any need for.
Well, yeah, but that's the thing is that now you're figuring out what briefcases you're going to keep. I can't think of a common briefcase that would contain all Americans that would even begin to meet the criteria of your 6 points.
Well, the nature of nationalism is that it's flexible and that it's open to revision. I mean, the Jewish national identity as it exists today is not the same as the Jewish national identity as it existed after the second exile, and the Jewish national identity as it existed after the second exile is not the same as the Jewish national identity as it existed, before the first one.
Thesis, right? Yeah, that's how posterity works, right?
Say again?
It's the Shippa thesis. That's how posterity works. There's always a little bit of mixing and matching. Yeah, I'm totally cool with mixing and matching.
Yeah, the essence has to be preserved, but there's still enough here in these 6 criteria that can be used for a revitalization of the national character, and historically this has been accomplished through a variety of techniques. So I'm reading a book right now by a fellow named Smith, and shit, let me pull it up really quick because I already forgot the fucking title. Hold on. Nationalism, a cultural approach. And there are 4 main mechanisms of ethnic self-renewal, according to him. There's religious reform, as exemplified in the history of the Jews. There's cultural borrowing, as exemplified in the encounter between Jewish and Greek cultures. There's popular participation, as exemplified with the social, religious, popular movement of, I'm mispronouncing this probably, Mazdakites in 5th century Sassanid Persia, undermining the foundations of the Sassanid state. And the 4th one is the myths of ethnic election, the lack of which might be related to the diminishment of the ethnic survival of Assyria, Phoenicia, and the Philistines. So there are tools available. I'm still reading on this, so I'm still formulating the basic idea of tactically how this is going to work. But strategically,
I don't see how this would work for America. I guess I don't.
Tactically, I don't have a picture, but strategically, the picture of in the long term of getting a stronger national identity rooted in these in this solidarity with symbols and values and culture and history. This is the strategic picture. This is the strategic project that I'm thinking about.
Well, I mean, the people who were typically like the core Americans, like they're becoming deeply alienated from the American project in a way that it's going to be almost impossible to revive. I mean, they just look at like the military recruitment numbers. They're like, people who've been volunteering for this country for ages are just not They're not volunteering for the military anymore.
Yeah, we're in a shitty state. Modernity is kind of a bitch. We've kind of we're drawing toward an apotheosis, but I think other nations have been through worse and they've pulled through. And I guess I have hopes for America, and I guess you don't, and maybe that's just.
I think, for instance, African Americans. So there's no way you're going to get them into a common identity with white Americans. I mean, their understanding of themselves is almost entirely oppositional to white America.
Okay, so then change the understanding, change the ideology, is what I'm saying.
Well, I can't just change African American culture. If we could just change African American culture, like flicking a switch, then
it's not every element of the culture. It's the fountainhead of the pathologies in the culture, which I think are ideological in character.
I mean, the African Americans feel that American history, in almost all of its ordinary forms, has been a long story of their victimization. And so virtually everything that the WASP, like red American guy is proud of, or the Southern guy is proud of, African Americans are angry about and consider a grievance. I don't know how to resolve that other than some kind of like messianic figure literally instituting like quality of outcome in some giant war.
Are you familiar with the term locus of control, internal versus external?
I've heard locus of control used, but I don't know, outside of the context, I don't know what it means.
Okay, so in a psychological context, the kind of person who has an external locus of control is the person who has the entitled victim mindset. This is a person who things happen to. Bad things happen to me, therefore I'm miserable and life is shitty and everyone else is awful and blah, 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 blah. Right? This is a defective character. And ideologically, you can export this defective character to an entire population to keep them in a shitty position. And then you have people who have an internal locus of control, people who, the people who are able to get through hard times by, well, for lack of a better term, just pulling through and being strong. And I think that, there's a lot to it. I don't have a formula on hand for how to change Black American ideology writ large. But what I am 100% sure of is that the process would require a transformation from the character trait of having an external locus of control, moving that to having an internal locus of control.
Sure, but it would be similar to like it will make Palestinians and Jews the same nation, right? I mean,
well, I mean,
that's possibly going to happen, right? Like it can't.
Well, a lot of things would have to happen in order for something like that to happen. Like the one-state solution has been discussed to death. And the principal obstacle, I'm not saying it's the only obstacle, but the principal obstacle is that Palestinians are not interested in having a national identity in which the Jews don't end up being second-class dhimmis.
Yeah, I imagine that's the case. I mean, this is a large problem with multi-ethnic, multiracial democracies, is that people are not going to achieve the same level of wealth. So if let's say that like everyone's on equal footing, but it turns out very likely to be like it is in America, and the Jewish population is like way wealthier than the Palestinian one, just like white America is a lot wealthier than the African American population, that will be considered unacceptable. Is it an acceptable situation? Like it won't feel like equality in that situation.
Well, I mean, we're going to have to kind of come to terms with the fact that equality under the law is the best you're going to be able to do, and that the people who promise equality of outcomes are not actually ever able or willing to deliver on it. What they want is to issue the promise of equality of outcome in order to be able to siphon away wealth and tax money and institutional funds in order to keep their grift running.
So the African American community was promised equality of outcome in the civil rights era. Like they didn't like sign on to the civil rights era because they just they wanted a lot of white people to move into their neighborhoods. They signed up rights because they wanted to be as rich as white people were, and the prospect of white people moving into their neighborhoods and them still being poor would not be particularly enticing.
There was a presumption that equality of opportunity would necessarily entail equality of outcome. Mm-hmm. And I think that people are just going to have to come to terms with the fact that that's not necessarily true. And people who have an internal locus of control, they can come to terms with that, and they can be happy with their lives without feeling resentful and miserable and thinking that everybody else is an evil bastard who just wants them to be hurt or whatever. And the question right now is how do we move from the current state of affairs where the ideologies are aligned in such a fashion that people with external locuses of control are rewarded to a different ideology in which people with internal locuses of control are rewarded. And my thinking, very low resolution thinking at this time, would be an alteration of the incentive structures and the way institutions reward certain types of behaviors versus certain types of actions. But as I say, these are kind of low resolution thoughts right now, so I'm not prepared to give like the King Crocoduck's guide to achieving the utopia of Crocostan. I don't have that right now.
I mean, look, African Americans are way more American than I am. They're way more American than I am. They're a core American demography. So, I mean, no disrespect to them in this regard, but I don't like accepting. I mean, how would it work? Like, you know, the professional class would be entirely white and Asian, and then the underclass would be African American, and then people are going to be okay with that. I don't see that happening, I guess, right?
It wouldn't necessarily look like that. Like, yeah, proportionally, yeah, you're gonna end up with more people in higher positions who are white and more people in lower positions who are black.
They're
But
pretty significant.
yeah, but fundamentally, you know, if you inculcate an ideology in which people are sufficiently taken care of to have their locus of control satisfied, um, and you adjust the ideology that these people have, white and black, um, to move away from the current culture of resentment. You know, fundamentally, I am reducing this to a psychological problem. I think fundamentally it has to do with people's attitudes and how they frame situations. And since this, in my view, is potentially correctable, this is the kind of solution that should be sought after, as opposed to
How is it correctable?
happens all the time in psychologist offices. People with external locus.
Oh no. Oh, you mean like the psychology of it? I don't. I think people be like. I mean, the big problem with the African American community always was that it feels like it's humiliated by the fact that it's an underclass.
Yeah, this is the psychology of a person who has an external locus of control. And what I'm saying is alter that psychology, change the ideology that people are subscribing to so that they feel more empowered in their own personal lives, irrespective of whatever material conditions they feel are not being adequately represented across whatever demographics.
I think you'd have to go back to some kind of like really ancient tradition where people are like, you are fine with the place that God put you, and God made you a carpenter.
Not like
God
that.
made you a street. Well, I mean, then what is it going to be, right? Like the white people just happened to win all the games and got to the top.
No, it's more like you get what you give. What you put in is what comes out. I don't have a high resolution picture of it. The terms that I have in mind are cast in terms of locus of control.
But this, I really disagree with the King Crocoduck. There's no way that you're like, you could get up and say, like, God put every race in his place and every person in his, or maybe you won't have race. It'll be like a colorblind, like feudal system. Like God put every person in his place, and if you happen to be a street sweeper,
talking about
like that, that's well, no, but like that would work, right? But if you get up and tell people that like the wealth you have is equal to the virtue you put into your work,
it's not.
And then
it's not a matter of virtue.
And then well, okay, but then all of the Africans are
Dave,
in the lower
Dave,
class.
Dave,
Like that tells a story that Africans are less virtuous than white
no,
people. This is
no. This presupposes that virtue is cashed out only in terms of material goods. What you get out of your participation in the economy is not a function of your value as a human being. It's a function of your value to the economy. There are other dimensions in which you can have value, and I think that encouraging that and endorsing that mindset could be an important step in the right direction. Because if you reduce people's value just to their material conditions, there are entire dimensions of the human experience that are being neglected. And where a person is deficient in one area, they can be what's the term I'm looking for? Antonym of deficient.
Yeah. Well, actually, I kind of agree with you here that like we would need to take society to become much less materialistic, much more focused on tradition and cultures being handed down through the generations, much more how people were before in the 19th century, right? Where there wasn't this expectation that you were on this giant ladder up some kind of corporate thing and you were fine to be on the family farm, or you're fine to be in your neighborhood and work for your neighborhood in its locality. I totally agree with you with that, but when people do that, they're going to be looking for like thicker cultures and all this stuff, and they'll start caring about things like posterity and ancestry and stuff like that, right?
Well, that's what I'm trying to endorse with this talk of nationalism, that there's going to be a conception of national identity which is going to be able to accommodate something like this. Not necessarily in the religious sense, because I'm not particularly interested, but I know you're a Catholic distributist. You want religion to be deeply integrated into this, and fine, that's your point of view.
I don't see what could fill this role if it's not religion or some very thick ethnicity.
Nationalism.
But nationalism, as you've described it, is essentially ethnicity with, some religious stuff mixed in, right? And I'm still not super
necessarily-
sure
not
how
necess-
Purim went from being a religious to a secular holiday, but like to me, this is all kind of a continuum, right?
It's basically Jewish Halloween, but like
All Hallows Eve, right? It's a religion. I would consider Halloween to be a somewhat religious holiday, although it's heavily secularized.
Well, look, I mean, I guess one of the things I was trying to get across during this talk was even if you have holidays and celebrations and festivals and cultural practices that in their origin are religious, there can be extracted from it a secularized and nationalized component, which is independently sufficient to ground a national identity, irrespective of the religious component. You can have the religious component, and the religious component, by virtue of bringing along the national component, will be sufficient for grounding the national identity, but it's not necessary.
I guess. I mean, I can't think of a time where where the kind of attitudes you're describing took place where it wasn't deeply religious or ethnic.
Israel. Well, if not ethnic. I mean, by ethnic, I'm defining ethnic in terms of solidarity with these symbols without any attachment necessarily to ancestry. Even if ancestry is correlated, fundamentally for me, it's about loyalty to the symbols and the values and the history and the culture. But I would
definitely I'll give Israel this. Like, Israel has solved one, I wouldn't say solved, but they appear to be kind of treading water on the number one most important issue of the entire century, which is birth rates. I don't see Israel as a solution to solving ethnic hostility, though. I'm not seeing that, especially if.
Why did the Ashkenazi get along so well with the Sephardic and the Mizrahim?
Because they have a common enemy and they have a common religion.
Okay,
if you put my ethnicity with a bunch of Armenians and a bunch of Polish people, and you put the Turks, I mean, this is not even hypothetical, this literally happened in 1689. If you combine a bunch of Polish people and a bunch of Germans, and let's just throw Armenians in there for good measure, the Armenians and the Germans and the Polish people will absolutely unify to fight the Turks.
Yeah,
and they will feel like one people. Yeah. They will feel like the Armenians are like what Armenian Orthodox, but they will feel like the Christian people against the Turkish people.
I don't dispute that the conflict with Palestine plays an important role in fostering community in the Jewish national identity, but a funny thing about conflict is it has a way of fusing differential national identities into a single unitary national identity. And that gets me wondering whether potentially a common enemy to all Americans coming from the outside might potentially serve as an opportunity for the fusion of these different Americas into a common national identity, which eventually through conflict with this external enemy achieves the kind of harmony that Israel has achieved. Like, if Palestine were to make peace with Israel right now, and Israel no longer has to worry about any of the Arab states surrounding it, the solidarity between the Ashkenazi and the Mizrahim and the Sephardim would not disappear. It's been fostered for too long. There's 3,000 years of history here, and it's not going to disappear overnight just because
there have been conflicts between Jewish groups before.
There have been conflicts, but these conflicts have never been so deep and so irreconcilable that the situation was hopeless. I mean, it just seems
we're comparing apples to oranges, right? We're comparing. I mean,
yeah, America's only a few hundred years old. The Jewish nation is thousands of years old. Fair enough.
Also, the Jewish nation has one single religion, which is Judaism. Like, if there are Muslim Jews and Christian Jews and Hindu Jews and Buddhist Jews, then you'd have a way harder time.
But Dave, 20% of Israel's population is Arab Muslims. I mean, and they're
part of the Jewish nation.
They are 75% of them in a poll 20 years ago. The number's probably even higher now, but 75% of them assented to the proposition that Israel defined as a Jewish democracy is something that they're totally cool with.
Yeah, but they don't consider themselves Jews. Like, I know this. I've talked to people from Israel who are Muslim. They don't consider themselves Jews.
Are they Palestinians or are they Arab Israelis?
I think they're Arab Israelis.
Okay. Well, de facto, they're members
Arab
of the
Israelis say, I'm Jewish.
De facto, they're members of the Jewish nation. If you ask them are you Jewish?
They say
They
they're
might
Israeli, but
listen.
I mean,
Listen, if you ask them, "Are you Jewish?" They'll probably interpret that as meaning, "Do I follow the Jewish religion?" And I know this is confusing because Jews, there's the national component, there's the religious component. These are separable, and it's a source of all kinds of confusion. But you ask them, "Hey, are you a member of the Jewish nation?" And the people who answered yes to this poll are going to be answering, yes. And that was 20 years ago. The number's probably even higher now.
the Jewish nation. Well, I'll have to ask an Arab from Israel that sometime.
Yeah, are you a member of the Jewish nation?
Well, so if they went to America, would they be a member of the Jewish nation?
Have they lost their Israeli citizenship, or are they just visiting?
Well, yeah, why not? They renounced their Israeli citizenship.
Okay, then they're not members of the Jewish nation anymore.
The Jew went to America and renounced his Israeli citizenship. Would he still be part of the Jewish nation?
It depends. Is he secular or is he religious?
God said secular, right?
Oh, yeah. But God said, I don't believe he left Israel and renounced. I believe it was Lebanon he left.
Either way,
why
would it matter?
It matters because the Judaic religion, the Jewish religion, contains the national identity. So if you leave Israel and you still have the religious component, you have the briefcase, you still have the national identity, even if you've left the state.
Well, this does, in my mind, make non-Jewish members of Israel second-class citizens.
Why?
Because their membership in the Jewish state is 100% contingent on their relationship with the nation state, and all other Jews, their relationship to the Jewish nation, or whatever you want to call it, is contingent on their blood and contingent
not on their blood.
Faith. Or whatever. I mean, there's secular Jews who consider themselves Jewish, and are
right.
atheist Jews who consider themselves Jews not part of the Jewish nation.
They are, so insofar as they accept the national identity. Like I said, these things are separable. You can separate the religious component from the national component. Adhering to the national component is a sufficient condition. Adhering to the religious component.
What would you need to know about someone to know that they were part of the Jewish nation?
That list of 6.
This 6 is a list of collective things, not of individual things.
Yeah, their solidarity with the history, the culture, the symbolism, and the whatchamacallit. There are 4 items. I don't remember off the top of my head, but basically, their values, their solidarity with Jewish symbolism, Jewish values, Jewish culture, and Jewish history. Have they bound their destiny to the destiny of the Jewish nation as a whole? If yes, they're Jews. If no, then no.
This seems to be I can't call. This doesn't seem to be a very solid definition. I mean, I'm fairly sure anybody who's Muslim outside of Israel would not consider themselves a Jew.
Mm-hmm.
And most people who are racially or ethnically Jewish, even if they practice none of the holidays and they don't cook any of the Yiddish or Sephardic food, would still consider themselves Jewish. And I've known a lot of people who've considered themselves Jewish. And so, none of the response on Twitter makes sense if we exclude people who don't do this. So, I mean, I'm just like de facto.
So let's talk a little bit about.
Is like,
Let's talk about one defect of the Jewish nation and a hard lesson that's being learned right now that other nations need to learn as well. And this is the existence of Jinas, Jews in name only.
Okay.
And who's the Jew in name only? Well, there were articles published during the Trump presidency about how people who were caught trying to illegally cross the border, they were separated from their kids, and their kids, they get sent to this holding facility. You know, it's not a terrible place, right? They've got video games, they've got schools, they've got bunk beds, but you know, you take a photo of like kids waiting in line, and you have news reporters, you have news coverage of this that says that this is Auschwitz. This is basically the United States is facilitating Auschwitz or some nonsense like this. Mm-hmm. So suppose one of the authors of these articles is somebody who nominally has Jewish heritage, and as a point of comparison, you mentioned in a video once how you had this coworker. You said she was Indian, but I don't know if that was a placeholder.
Oh,
and she,
yeah, I've had the one that was like a complete SJW, right?
yeah, completely disconnected from her culture, but her connection to the culture, her connection to anything related to it was predicated solely on her ability to use it as a cudgel against whoever
Oh yeah.
in the institution, right? Mindy Kaling came to mind when you.
What happened to Mindy Kaling? She was so good on The Office, and then she became insufferable.
Yeah,
but
she wasn't. She wasn't acting in The Office.
Well,
that was really her.
Well,
But,
the person I was thinking was more like Saira Rao. A little, you know Saira Rao?
I do not.
She's this woman who runs this race to dinner thing. She's like this insufferable anti-white progressive. She like literally charges people to go over their houses and lecture them about whiteness.
Right.
And she's Indian. She's like one of the richest, race in this entire country.
Yeah.
Or richest income at least.
Yeah. So you could have an author of an article of the sort that I'm describing, and here's a person who is essentially prostituting the dead of the Holocaust to achieve her political objective. This is not a person who has any real solidarity with the Jewish nation. This is a person who desecrates the dead of the Holocaust to advance a political agenda. And you're like, oh my God, the fucking holding facility where the kids go to while their parents are being detained for a misdemeanor. It's like Auschwitz. No, it's even worse than Auschwitz. Auschwitz had 4 bars of Wi-Fi. This place only has 3. Right? It's ridiculous. Like you can't claim to be a member of the Jewish nation if this is the kind of shit you're pulling. I don't think that Jainas
political treachery. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't recognize Jainas as members of the nation. And I think that one of the great mistakes of the Jewish nation as it's currently constituted, and a mistake that there's talk of rectifying, is potentially doing away with Jainas. And that sounds really
How are you
going
to do that?
No, well, how exactly is a technical matter? But the point I'm trying to say is this is one of the reasons why this genetic lineage thing is for me a non-starter, because you are admitting the possibility of having liabilities in your nation and excluding assets. And we have no need for Jainas, in my opinion, and you have no need for San Francisco bugmen. So
right now, look, I'll be frank with you. I don't have. I really don't have any connection to America. I feel like it's just. I do kind of like what it once was. I see it as an America that was in the past, or a nation that was in the past. But I don't look at America right now and go like, there's a culture here. I see that there's a bunch of people squabbling to grab all the resources they possibly can before the financial structure collapses. And there's no understanding of common history. And I would be much more natural for me to feel at home in some kind of like German, like not that I really have this or it exists, because there's no apparatus to facilitate this. And anti-Germanness has been a matter of United States policy for, like 60 years, like I've said, like this denazification stuff, right? The literal policy, I kind of did a double take here looking at this, like the literal policy of the United States is to go to Germany and make Germans not identify with their Germanness and just conflate Germanness with exclusively the Third Reich.
Yeah, I don't think that's the correct answer. I think there is something in German national identity that one can take stock of the evil that one did. But it doesn't have to be the basis of your national identity. You can it's not the most constructive way to produce a collectivity. But my answer to what you're saying is, I'm going to sound like a broken record, is it's got to come down to changing the ideology and grounding everybody under the same national identity, the same baseline from which they can move forward. But I understand this is an impasse.
What does that mean? I don't understand how, for America, that project must be finished. How does this work? Like our generation is completely 100% like on the. Who are the people who are the core Americans now who are like, America is one thing, right? There's no, like you said, an outside enemy.
Yeah, there has
what's
to
the
be
outside enemy that's more outside?
Yeah, there has to be tactical conversations about how to actually implement the kind of strategy that the low resolution general strategy that I'm trying to suggest here, right? The high resolution tactic of how to actually go about, well, what steps are we going to take to get to Crocostan, right? I don't have the steps right now, but I don't believe that those steps are impossible just based on the history of the Jews. Other nations have been through worse circumstances than this, and they've pulled through. And I believe that if we learn from those lessons, if we learn the lessons of the people like the Jews, and you adopt some of the practices that they put into place, maybe not necessarily the religious component, or if you feel the religious component is essential, you could give that a try.
I mean, so
there are lessons
religion.
to be learned here. There
it's
are
not
lessons
ethnicity.
to be learned here.
Let's go down. What do I, a Catholic, have in common with like a Hindu? Right.
Let's say you both accept.
Neighbor, right?
Let's suppose you and your Hindu neighbor both.
We're Americans.
Yeah, fine. So you're both multidimensional beings, right? You both belong to multiple collectivities at once. You like Magic the Gathering. He likes Pokemon. You like, I don't know, Rick and Morty. He likes Back to the Future. I'm sorry to attribute these things to you, Dave.
No, it's fine. I Magic the Gathering is my one vice. Is not my one vice, but it's a publicly known vice of mine. But go ahead. But I mean, like, that's not going to build like consumer culture cannot build it.
Yeah. What I'm saying is, somebody can like cape shit. Like you can belong to multiple collective identities. Some of it can be bullshit collective identities of the consumer variety. Some of it can be something deeper. I claim that if you share at least one deeper common identity in the form of a thick national identity with your Hindu neighbor, you now have a shared grammar of symbolism and values that you can use as the basis. The list of 6.
Well, that's what a thing would have to have in order to qualify.
Right.
Yeah, let's name. We're not the same ethnicity. We don't have the same homeland. We certainly don't have the same ancestry. Well, we're both immigrants.
We're talking about specifically the American national identity. So you have multiple identities, right? You have multiple dimensions to your identity. One of those dimensions is going to be the American national identity, and that national identity is going to be the common basis from which you build your nation. Separate from each other, you go off. You have your own communities, right? We don't all have to be identical to each other. You can go to church. He can go to. I don't know. Do Hindus go to a temple? I don't know the religion that
temple,
well.
Yeah. I mean, like, we don't have a myth of common ancestry, certainly, because neither of us came from.
You have Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving is the origin. It's the point of origin for your common national identity as Americans.
But they don't eat meat, and like.
Okay, so turkey is not on the menu. Fine, it's not a huge deal. The point is the symbolism. The point is the values. Okay, they don't need to be. I don't know, Dave. What I'm trying to say is you've got multiple dimensions to your identity, and if you've got one of these dimensions in common with somebody else, you have solidarity here. You have something here that can be used as the basis for a community.
Yeah, I listed Hindu because Hindus are a people that I have absolutely no hostility or feeling to one way or the other, right? Like, there's been zero conflict between myself and Hindus ever, or any people that I represent. So like, it's just like an interesting, like, but it could go down from there. Like, then there's all these people who have grievances against each other, right? Like,
Sure, but those grievances can be adjudicated once they have a common grammar of values and symbolism that they all have solidarity with. Right? If we're not speaking the same language, we can't resolve our disputes.
We speak English, but everyone does.
No,
right,
but by language, I mean things like values and symbol. I don't mean like literally the words and grammar we use. I mean the alignment of a particular set of values and a particular set of loyalties and solidarities that can align us along a certain basis.
If there's one thing the last 10 years have taught me, is that Americans don't really have any common values. And that's the thing. Like, I have zero common values with the average progressive in this country. I mean, maybe not zero.
I believe.
I struggle to think of a person that I have fewer values in common than a progressive.
Again, I believe that this is a historically contingent circumstances, which is potentially correctable through ideological alteration. But again, I realize this is probably an impasse between you, the pessimistic curmudgeon, and me, the cheery optimist.
I mean,
you know, it's not illegal to smile, Dave.
Oh, I smile. I mean, I think that if there is ever a time when kind of, I don't know, man. And what people want, like what people are you're gonna end up with a King Crocoduck because people are going to grasp for identities that have solid characteristics to them. They're going to be common religious identities, and they're going to be common ethnic identities. Not because like people are looking at actual genes, because ethnic identities, like genes, are a proxy for common history. And like that's what's going to happen, right? I don't know, like that's and being the person who's caught on the outside of that, like if you're the person who's not like developing your own ethnicity or own concept of nation that actually means something. I mean, like I could imagine a concept of the American identity, but it would be almost entirely vacant, right? And so, okay, so my neighbor has a concept of Muslim identity, right? Or a concept of Jewish identity, or a concept of Chinese identity. He could go through the 6 questions and like fill them with detail and quality and thickness. My American identity would have like Thanksgiving, and and half the people I can literally can't even eat the same meal with them.
Then do something about that, Dave.
Oh, we'll do something about like what do you want me to do? We want me to change the composition of this country so that it's
I want you to change your conception of what constitutes an American national identity. I want you to make it thicker and make it something that could be used as the basis for a community, instead of just saying, oh, right now at this moment in time, you know, with the erosion of American values as a result of managerial and technocratic interests. Okay, yeah, I get it. We get it. Like the shit has been eroded.
I can do that. That Queen Isabella did that.
The what?
Queen Isabella made the Spanish identity thicker.
I don't understand the reference.
Oh, Queen Isabella. She
Queen Isabella.
She had a multicultural country on her hands after defeating the Muslims, and her solution was just to declare Christianity as the religion. And if you weren't,
that's a solution. It's not my solution, Dave. I know that's a solution you like.
I mean, no, I'm not saying. I'm being facetious here, King Crocoduck. I mean, like it. The thing is, like the tools to do this are. I don't know, man. The tools to do this is I can't make people all have the same religion. I can't make people celebrate all the same holidays. And I certainly can't change the past or their history or how they look. And people will always associate how they look with their past. So I don't know how you could even possibly fix this, right? Like, look, I could see how I use Queen Isabella as an example of the brutality it would need to create these situations. I mean, I wouldn't want to do that. I would want people to just have their own separate nations, right?
Yeah. Well, look, I know you hate it when people drop bibliographies, but you know, I'm gonna ask you to consider reading Ethnosymbolism and Nationalism: A Cultural Approach. It's pretty short. It's like less than 200 pages. The author's a guy named Smith. And you know, just give it a read and see what you think. At least see if maybe you can add a tool to your arsenal in your project of cultural restoration in whatever capacity you want to do it in, whether it's national or otherwise. My project is an explicitly nationalistic one, and I hope that maybe over the course of this conversation, my views on these matters at least became clearer.
I appreciate your contribution, King Crocoduck, but I'm the feeling on my side of these things is that we're handed like these impossible problems to fix. And then it's like, okay, like, well, you can feel proud of your country when you figure out a way to like make all the races achieve at school at equal parity. Like I've heard that one a few times from progressives. Like America can't feel proud as long as there's a racial gap in achievement. And so I'm
Yeah,
sitting
no,
here with
what
this impossible problem on my hand. Like, so my pride is like behind this impossible jigsaw puzzle that no one has ever been able to figure out.
allow me to
And like, I
amend that.
appreciate the sentiment, but like fix this problem that no one's ever figured out without using massive amounts of brutality like Isabella did. You know, I use that as an example of, you know, the violence I fear would be necessary to fit a square peg into a round hole. You can fit a square peg into a round hole if you smash the edges off the square, the peg.
Yeah.
But like, I don't imagine that as an ideal future, you know?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is a relevant tactical concern when you look at the high resolution. How do you actually go about engaging in this project and moving us from here to there? But you know, the low resolution strategic project of grounding everyone within common national identity seems to me, at the very least, a worthy endeavor that's worthy of consideration and hashing out the details of the high resolution tactical aspect of it. And that's going to be kind of my last word on the issue for tonight.
Okay, I mean, fair enough. I do respect your opinion. I feel like we're kind of speaking separate languages. I mean, if anything, I wish that we could have our own Israel for every different nation of people. I see the Western countries trying to push in the opposite direction.
I agree. I think they need to be more like Israel, with nation defined along those 6 characteristics that I suggested.
Yeah. I'm afraid that I'm really worried that these 6 characteristics are just going to be what we classically see in terms of ethnicity, race, and religion, just remixed in separate ways. And
if that ends up being the case incidentally, I honestly don't care. I want to have people who are loyal to the same set of values and symbols, irrespective of what their race is. And if this results in a distribution of races that doesn't match the kind of parity that progressives are looking for, then whatever. I'm not looking for equality of outcome. I'm looking for people who are invested in a project of society in which we can work together and do something that's constructive. So that's where I stand.
Maybe this is just I really hate to. I think maybe I misrepresented you on my talk on Fiddler's Green podcast. So I apologize for that if I indeed did. Maybe what our difference is just a difference of pessimism and optimism. I
would say so.
Yeah. I'm very. At this point, I'm very, very. I feel like I've gotten a keen sense for what unsolvable problems look like and how they're used to screw me over. Right? I mean, haven't you seen a few of those, like unsolved? Like, here, guys, solve this unsolvable problem, and then you'll get your reward, right?
Yeah.
Untie the Gordian knot, right? Like,
you literally just described the history of the Jewish nation. Hey, guys, go. People who are spread out in diaspora, and who are marginalized and oppressed in all of these foreign nations and foreign lands, go ahead and make the desert bloom in your homeland. Oh, you did it? Good job, you guys. That's the source of my optimism. I think that everybody else should be allowed to make their deserts bloom. But
I think that I do appreciate what Israel did. I also appreciate what the Boers in South Africa did too, which is not and I think that this is something that will, I think that whatever Israel did, it's certainly working now because they have replacement birth rate, and that is my gold standard for working. So I will definitely agree that foreign entanglements notwithstanding, whatever Jews are doing inside of Israel domestically is causing them to have, in a highly technological society, more than 2 children per woman. I think that that's an interesting thing that we should pay attention to. I don't know. I think it's gonna be a lot more messy though than you might believe. But it sounds like you have to go. I have super chats, so you can stay or if you want to.
I've got to hit the gym before it closes.
All right, man. Well, thanks so much for showing up. I hope we clarified things, and I do appreciate your optimistic perspective on this matter, right? We're all trying to solve the same problem.
Thanks very much, Dave. And remember to smile. At least
Okay,
once
I
in a
will.
while. All right.
All right. Thanks a lot, King
All right.
Crocoduck. Have a good night. Goodbye.
You too. Bye.
All right, guys. On to the super chats. I guess I'm just trying to think of what to take from that talk. I don't feel like I really connected with anything he was saying. I don't think America is a solvable problem inside the parameters of liberal democracy. It will require some kind of hard hand to keep things in order. To get thick, it requires an even stronger totalitarian hand of the kind that I talked about with Isabella. And then I don't know if I don't see that coming on the horizon. I think we're too weak to implement something like that. We have to make do with the world as it is. I don't know. I wish every nation could have their own Israel. I wish every peoples could have their own country to call their own. I think that the American government has pretty much, they pretty much determined that this would be would be against government policy to have this ever occur in Germany. I'm actually amazed. Like, I did some research before this stream, and people asked me, I'm like, oh, well, is there, there was a question about whether German identity was legitimate. So I was expecting to maybe get some questions about legitimacy of German identity. And I just looked up the denazification article on Wikipedia. And I obviously know this stuff is true. I know that the United States government had a policy to institute the idea of collective guilt in the German people. But I wasn't aware that this was literally just on Wikipedia. Like, I thought this was only the dusty books that me and my friends collect. But literally right now, in November 26th, 2023, they just have, it's all there. They have the entire U.S. government program of trying to institute collective guilt on the German people at all levels and discourage German identity, literally as paid for by the United States State Department and the United States intelligence apparatus after World War II. It's all documented right on Wikipedia, and then all the Adorno stuff too, with the, the collective guilt of Auschwitz makes it so that there can be no legitimate pride in Western European identities after this moment. It's all there. How do you create a feeling of collective pride if this is your history for the last 60 years? But anyway, I'll answer some super chats here. So Photor Habdus Luminescens for $50. In the later Dune books, you have the collapse of the Fremen identity. Why? Because the desert disappears. This was a common struggle all Fremen faced together. I don't think a national identity can exist long without a common struggle. How can French, German, Polish, Russian identities exist without struggle against each other? Well, currently, I think that these European identities will exist as a struggle against the EU and against global managerialism and against uncontrolled immigration into Europe, and then they'll form up religiously into something else. Catoman 55 for USA $10. The Smithsonian U.S. federal government has identified white people and their traditions and attitudes and way of life in order to denigrate them. Well, yeah, I do agree with that, Catoman. I mean, like, this is like the denazification question. I think King Crocoduck probably would say that this is part of the woke ideology that he fights. And I mean, I agree with him that it's bad. But I mean, the problem is that this stuff is observable. I mean, the difficulty is that racial differences and ethnic differences are observable. So if you deny them and pretend like they don't exist, you immediately come off as less honest. And people want to live out these distinctions. I mean, you're not going to be able to have, like, you're not going to be able to convince African Americans that their role in society is to be the lower class to a country dominated by whites and Asians. They're never going to accept that. Now, I think that we could live together if there was an understanding that we're totally focused on our own communities. We're totally focused on making the African American community as good as it possibly could be. But that's not the narrative that America's been telling itself for the last 100 years. The last 100 years has been, you shouldn't be loyal to your local community. You should be loyal to the macrocosmic American project, because the macrocosmic American project is a meritocracy. Oh, I'm sorry, Hunger. I wish I could have asked this to, Hunger. Do the Palestinians, damn it. I usually am good at thinking of questions, but just the approach is just totally kind of caught me off guard, right? So do Palestinians satisfy your criteria as a national identity? If not, why? Arab is not an ethnicity. It's similar to Hispanic in that it contains multiple races in a linguistic cultural history. A Palestinian and an Egyptian is different as a Venezuelan and a Colombian. Yes. I wish I would have asked him that. Is it... I mean, we can kind of anticipate his response. His response would be something along the lines of, you haven't satisfied these 6 collective criteria, and I'm sure there'd be one of them. I don't think that like this whole idea of developing external criteria, like these criteria that he listed about names and ancestry and shared festivals and all this stuff, this is all highly arbitrary. I mean, I'm sure that if he brought this up, he would say like, okay, what really is the difference in cultural traditions? Like, what name a festival that Palestinians celebrate that Jordanians don't, or that Egyptians don't, or so on and so forth, right? But that's ridiculous, right? Because the reason why you can't do that with Judaism is because it's a separate religion. The reason why you can do that with Palestinians, find other peoples that celebrate similar festivals, is because they share religions across borders. So the distinction he'd be making between Jews and Palestinians would not be it would not be like a natural extension of these criteria. It would be an extension of the fact that the Jewish religion is strongly attached to the nation, and the Islamic religion is not strongly attached to any particular ethnicity or small, well-defined set of ethnicities inside the region, right? Okay, well, thank you very much, Hunger. Cataman 55. Having ideological tests is actually more fascist or totalitarian than simply basing a political entity on a people. When power is up for grabs, immigration is a weapon in multi-ethnic states. This is why Israel has differential immigration policy for different types of foreigners. Yeah, I did mention that, right? I mean, I did mention that to King Crocoduck, but I mean, the problem is just like, the problem, this sort of depends on, the thing is, we have to respect the fact that King Crocoduck, to my knowledge, does not advocate for mass immigration into European countries, and is not on board with the woke anti-white policies or anti-German policies in Germany that exist as an extension of mass migration and the imperial project of the Allies or the Western powers from 1918 onwards. We have to respect the fact that he's not on board with this. So it's not so much of a hypocritical, quality, but Israel default assumes that everybody who's not Jewish is not deeply loyal to the Jewish state, as they should statistically. And in almost all other Western countries, it's the exact opposite. The exact opposite is, if you say the right words and make the right sounds and then just put your hand over your heart, then we default assume that you're going to assimilate into Germany, that you're going to assimilate into America, that you're going to assimilate into Britain. And this is it's not, it doesn't work like that. In reality, it's set up so that everyone defaults in to Western countries, and everyone's defaulting out of or they're defaulting to not immigrate to Israel unless they have some historical reason to be considered Jewish otherwise. Catoman for $10. America is a multi-ethnic empire. The sane way to run one is what Russia does. Let differential groups have their own religious, linguistic, and cultural areas. Yes, that is the idea. Like that. Let different groups have their own religious, linguistic, cultural areas. Forcing people to live near people who hate them is totalitarian and wicked. Focus on class is reduced in diverse societies. Elite extract more wealth. I mean, there will certainly be more corruption in a multi-ethnic society, and I don't know how you possibly fix that. Because with a multi-ethnic society, you necessarily can't have a very strong set of ethics built into the nation at the national level. You won't be strong enough to actually do that. So, but I mean, the Russian model is closer to what I see working for America. But that would require a sort of central executive figure to suppress the democratic abuses of identity politics, which will always and everywhere win. Pac-Man Respector for $5. I advise King Crocoduck to strongly hash out tactics and actions that could even conceptually bring about his unfinished strategy before attempting to debate its merits again. I don't believe he will. Yeah, I mean, this is the reality of the Jewish state is that it is more or less a mono-religious state. And to the extent that it's not mono-religious, the religions that are there swear fealty. I wouldn't call them dhimmis, but they kind of are, right? Like if you're swearing fealty to the religion of a state that is not your religion, and to the point where you're going around and telling people that you're that religion, even though you don't practice it, then yeah, that's kind of like Israel is essentially a mono-religious state with a dhimmi class. I don't know what else to call. I guess their taxes are they're not taxed more. That's the one difference between the Islamic dhimmi caste in Islamic societies. But the immigration policy certainly favors Jews, as was literally discussed on this thing. And you know, so functionally, Israel only has to worry about one religion wielding political power and two ethnic groups that are not so dissimilar. It would be like mixing me with, you know, Poles or Armenians or something like that, which, you know, is not such a super stretch. And they all have a common sense of their own history and all have a common enemy. That problem is not the problem that we're dealing with in the West. And I don't think we can press it. I don't think that there's any reasonable way that we could implement Israel in this scenario. I have no idea. Don DeWitt for $20. A delightful display of patience while hard wrangling this guy, Dave. One big point these types purposely ignore is that anyone trying to use these 6 attributes to form a society will inevitably define that ethnicity and heritage as Occam's ratio that optimizes in the way. Yeah, hold on a second. I need to mute this. Pardon me. Yeah, I mean, this is also the problem too. Like, so let's say, for instance, that I have a thick concept of being German, like on the 6 points that King Crocoduck laid out. I think I literally said this in the conversation. If I implemented this thick understanding of Germanness, it would be 99% ethnically German people, and there would be one like African who really loved Goethe, and there would be like 20 Japanese people who were like deep Germanophiles and who were all about German culture from a young age. And then all the other people would either be entirely German or they would be partially German in the same way that it exists in Israel. So, I mean, yeah, I mean, and then everyone would know, right? Everyone would know that, like, even though you say it's ethnicity, you actually are using race as a criteria. And this is how it is in the Civil Rights Act, right? If I create a criteria that excludes all Africans, even though it's a cultural criteria, I am still default assumed to be using race as a criteria, even if I don't explicitly make it part of my judgment criteria. That's how civil rights has worked for the last 60 to 70 years. And hypothetically, it wouldn't work that way, but it just doesn't. Nerve and V-Maker. All groups identify themselves in opposition to what they aren't. Jewish identity is tied up in being God's chosen people as opposed to all other people. It is impossible to be a group without an out-group. Well, I would argue that religion is not like that. Religion is, I mean, unless you consider the out-group atheists. And obviously, religions have out-groups because of theological differences. But the chief thing that organizes you inside a religion is not like your political opposition to another people. It's your devotion to God and your practice of certain specific ceremonies in the right Orthodox way, which is why, this is a perfect example of this would be the Orthodox Jews that hate Israel, right? They're so into their actual religious identity that they'll actually cut against the secular Jewish state. The problem is that we're dealing with kind of a Mott and Bailey in King Crocoduck's example. When it needs to be ethnic or racial, it will behave in an ethnically or racial way. When it needs to be religious, it will behave in a religious way. Christianity does not work like this. And so the same solution can't possibly work for Christian countries. Anyway. So the benefit of, he said Ginos, but I would say Genos or something like that. The benefit of Jews in name only is that you can tell who their real God is just by saying their name out loud. Okay, fair enough. I mean, progressive shitlib. We've had a lot of progressive Jewish people over the last month. Basically turn out to be incredible nationalists for the state of Israel, in contravention of their ordinarily stated woke beliefs in most other contexts. I am not confident at all how to square that circle. And so, okay, Dreadnought for $5. My heart hopes that Crocoduck is right, but my mind knows that you are correct. The key when he stated that Palestinian intransigence was insurmountable while failing to connect it to African-American anti-whiteism, an unsolvable problem for unity. Yeah. I mean, I agree that the African-American problem is not nearly as bad as the one that's going on in the West Bank right now in terms of killing people. Unless you do something funky with crime rates. But the fundamental problem is the same thing. I mean, the fundamental problem is that African Americans define themselves via their people's story as being the people who were oppressed by white people. And so then asking for them to give that up is going to be disintegrating the African American community in a large way. I don't see how that can possibly occur. Photo harb subminiscence, whatever, for $10. To expand on my previous super chat, I fear once the managerial fight is won, either national identity degradation will continue, or that French, German, and Poles and Russians will go to the trenches to kill and fight each other again. Well, this is why people in my position look forward to something like monarchy to fix this problem, because this would be an utter disaster for any kind of ruler of these people to simply have them destroyed in the trenches. So, yes. Kevin Pullman for $3. It's always a 6-step guide and nationalism with these secular Jews like King Crocoduck and Yarvin. You're never going to convince men to die and women not to use birth control for shared festivals. Well, certainly not if the festivals have no religious connotation to them. I mean, The problem is that in order to make Thanksgiving fit for all the other groups in this country, we essentially have to empty it out of content. We have to make it so that it's no longer strictly linked to the pilgrims being a specific people, or necessarily having a specific religion, or necessarily eating a certain kind of food. I mean, at the end of the day, what you have left over when you make it lowest common denominator enough to satisfy everyone is a religion that satisfies nobody. People are inspired by specific connections, not by general vague ones. Nerve AMV maker for $3 USA. Why should anyone believe his criteria is legitimate instead of a carefully selected one designed to legitimate certain nationalities and not others? What gives it legitimacy? I mean, yeah, and that's also the problem too. Because Judaism has ethnicity and race and religion so tightly linked inside its self-conception, it can pass these 6 criteria with flying colors, and everyone outside on the Jewish nation is going to be very, very easy to identify. So let's say, though, that I agree that America has all of these qualities. I mean, people celebrate Thanksgiving in Canada. They do. So are Canadians Americans? And I'm sure people celebrate harvest festivals in Mexico that occur, of course, during harvest in November. So are Mexicans Americans? And then I've seen other people in other countries celebrate Thanksgiving, and how if they eat like turkey and celebrate Christian prayers in their Thanksgiving, then how come they're not how are they not closer to me than the Hindu family, who's I'm sure very nice, but does not celebrate with Christian prayers, has no genetic connection to the pilgrims, and doesn't even eat the same food for the holiday. It doesn't, so you could see how these criteria are very easy to deconstruct for everybody who's Gentile. So, I'm sure this is the thing true. Whenever you have a linguistic rule, any linguistic rule can be deconstructed and gamed. So whenever you agree to a linguistic rule as the boundary for your own identity, and that's not tightly linked to some physical thing in this world, or some living God, or some like living genetic legacy, that linguistic boundary is going to be gamed. That's why the Constitution is a dead document. The Constitution has now been declared to have said things that are obviously the opposite of what the founders meant in their original concept of writing the document. And God knows the government of America is exactly the opposite of what the founders imagined. They would be horrified seeing it. But it's still linguistically there. So, I mean, like, okay, I'm sure these 6, they subverted the Constitution, but I'm sure that these 6 points, those will, be the immortal words that, heaven and earth will pass away, but these 6 points that King Crocoduck laid out will not. I mean, I do appreciate King Crocoduck's work. Very intelligent guy. I do think he's trying to make things better, and I do appreciate the fact that he hates this anti-white stuff. But like, these 6 points will be subverted and picked apart the second any modern nation state tries to use them to exclude a single immigrant. I can't imagine, a modern leader of Germany using these 6 criteria to keep a Pole out of Germany. It would never happen. Ben White for $3 USA. I don't understand why he's so intent on separating nation and blood heritage. When 2 peoples live in the same place and share the same values for a very long time, they will merge into one people. Yes, exactly, right? I mean, like, I'm not even being an autist about it. I'm not saying that like there's a certain purity level, right? But like the connection of mother and father to children, like that's the essential quality. That's the essential quality that creates the great chain link of history. And so, it doesn't matter that like, for instance, modern French people are connected to the Gauls of yore because that's part of their genetic legacy. It doesn't matter that half of their genetic legacy is also Frankish, which were a separate people during the time of Julius Caesar. What matters is that they both contributed to what French people are right now. Without that link, so much stuff starts falling away really, really quickly. Yeah, I don't know how to do this. It's also statistic. Like I said, it's also, this is another thing. I don't want to bet against statistics. I don't want to create rules that are designed with the statistical exception as the motivating factor for their existence. I'd much rather just say that more often than not, race plays a factor in determining what ethnicity is, than to say something like, well, it's all about history, and it just happens to correlate 99.99% time with the racial divisions that we can see right in front of our eyes. I'd rather just be honest and say that this is just part of it in almost all practical circumstances. First of all, I think that posterity is absolutely 100% an essential part of it, and that means cultural and genetic. And to get around that, a break in either of those things requires a massive exception that has to be a certain caveat in history. And I'm not just getting that from like my own preferences. Like I was literally reading Genesis with my, for Bible study. And that's like 90% of the book is establishing genetic lineage. And they really, they don't even care about marriage. Like, screw the matrilineal stuff. If you're genetically related to these people, like, you've got a connection. That's a huge thesis of that book. And that's the core. Genesis is the Torah. That's the core text of the Jewish religion. You can't tell me that. Obviously Moses, the quintessential founder of Judea, or quintessential founder of all, or one of the founders of all Abrahamic religions, in addition to Abraham, right? Like, he married a Midianite who supposedly had Cushite blood, which is now, by our province, probably a mixed race African Egyptian woman, right? Who is both African and Caucasian, right? And so, and that was still part of the Jewish line, right? But that Moses was a key component of that thing too, right? So you can quite clearly see the difference between the essential genetic quality of peoplehood, which has always been a quality of peoplehood throughout all human history, historical times, with exceptions for adoption sometimes. And then sort of like the autistic, early 20th century hyper focus on phenotype, the Murdoch joke, the 100% Bavarian phenotype joke from that criteria. Anyway, let's go on here. Spud Ruckus for $5. Churches in the U.S. are one of the last institutions that can practice freedom of association. The demographics don't lie. Continuing to ignore this helps no one. Love your work. Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Spud Ruckus. Cattleman for 55. The entire regime's political project is creating a political coalition of people whose identity is defined in opposition to what America was before the WASPs. Yeah, look, guys, like America, there are three core American groups, in my opinion: WASPs, Native Americans, and African Americans. Those are the people who came to this country and founded new nations. And the United States existed to keep those three people, WASPs, Native Americans, and African Americans, existing in some form as separate people. That was always the idea. Then with Ellis Island, the WASPs decided that Europeans, broadly speaking, were close enough, and we could create some kind of like pan-European identity inside America that was, if we're being honest, broadly Christian, with an exception, or one single exception in the late 19th century. And then post-1965, it's basically like the entire world comes here. And at that point, I have no idea what we have in common, because any group other than aliens we could hypothetically be at war with guaranteed has a substantial group of people in America who call themselves Americans. So now America just means a passport. As far as I'm concerned, what most people will mean when they say American is WASP American. WASP American, and then some Scotch Irish and some High Church Catholics and High Church Episcopalians like William F. Buckley that were 100% assimilated into the recusant Catholics would also be a legitimate, right? I think, didn't Maryland have a bunch of recusant Catholics? And there was one signer of the the Declaration of Independence who was Catholic. And I'm pretty sure that he was a recusant Anglo. A recusant just means a Episcopalian that refused to go along with the Church of England and remained loyal to Rome. Like, yeah, sure, fine. Those guys are like 100% pure American, right? But like Catholics of my background that just hopped over from like on my mother's side from like Ireland, bumfuck Germany, or worse yet, like Germans that literally came over after World War II because they were ethnically cleansed out of Eastern Europe. I mean, like I have to try to be American, right? I speak English. I consume American pop culture. But like you sneeze and the history that my family has with this country will blow away in the wind. Right? I mean, that has no offense to Ellis Islanders. Like, you're my people, but I mean, let's be honest with that, right? Like, you know, our connection to what went on with the founding fathers is as strong as our connection to, like, you know, Power Rangers or, you know, Captain Marvel or whatever. I know some people died and fought in wars, and that can never be undone. And, you know, the Ellis Islanders fought in World War I and World War II, and actually a lot of Ellis Islanders, the early ones, fought in the Civil War. And that in many ways forges you as an American. And, you know, after Civil War and after World War II, there was a chance, and, you know, I think that's what John F. Kennedy symbolized. John F. Kennedy symbolized the chance that America would have a new ethnogenesis in the form of some kind of combination of all the races that were inside it, which were like 90% European in 1963. But that died. And then we got Art Celler, and then we got America as a passport, and America is now a passport. And the history that we have that we didn't participate in and that we don't dedicate ourselves to with religious oaths, that is triviality. Angry Argonian for $5 USA. I didn't understand King Crocoduck's notion of ideology, e.g., how is a French ideology separate from a German one? If it's just material culture, that seems very surface level. If it's about core values, then what's the difference? Just have one country. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's hard. I mean, Jews don't speak the same language. That's for sure. I mean, modern Israel speaks the same language, but like Jews in Europe spoke Yiddish. I don't even know what Jews in Germany spoke Yiddish. I don't even know what Jews in Russia spoke. Presumably some kind of Russian pidgin variation. It certainly wasn't Yiddish. Yiddish is like a derivation of German, more or less. Yeah, I have no idea. I mean, maybe, but like Jews never spoke the same language. They certainly didn't have the same ideology. The things that unify the Jews are their religion is the same, and their bloodlines are all linked back to an original set of people that was exiled from Palestine at some point. And, you know, obviously there was a lot of admixture to the point where, you know, you're talking that maybe even 90% of these lines might be, you know, admixtures from the place that they moved over the subsequent 2,000 years. But it is still like a genetic lineage and a religion and a set of traditions that are very similar to each other. You know, that's why this works. Getting me and a Zulu into the same ethnic group is, and like just saying Thanksgiving, I don't see how that fixes the problem. Like, I'm sure a Zulu is also thankful that he had a harvest in fall when harvests happen in the Northern Hemisphere. But that does not give us a common history. That does not give us any kind of common artistic sensibility. There's too much of a separation there. Photo Habdusimilicerns. I am Belgian, and the Balkans are painted with the blood of Balkan. Oh, sorry, I totally misread it. I am Bulgarian. Okay, now that makes sense. I'm Belgian, and the Balkans. That didn't make sense. Okay, I'm Bulgarian. I am Bulgarian. The Balkans are painted with the blood of Balkan people. I think if I keep peace with our neighbors and don't pursue the achievement of San Stefano treaty borders for Bulgaria, my national identity would be a LARP. I like peace, but isn't a German not pursuing Danzig a LARP? Well, no, I don't think I have to retake like like my father and grandmother were born in, I won't name the town, but they were born in a small city on the Danube that is near the Hungarian border of Serbia. It was called Yugoslavia at the time. Like my heritage is not dependent on me going and like kicking out the Serbs that live there now. That would be horrific. The German sensibility is fundamentally Faustian, insofar as I live up to, as far as I live up to my. To me, it seems a much more German thing to build like a new Germany in Brazil than it does to try to figure out how you're going to take back a town in Poland if you're going for Danzig or Gdansk, as it's called now in Poland, or to try to take back some, Danube city in Serbia with no greater plan to rule. I mean, our excellence comes from the religious goal we follow, intermixed with sort of the Faustian understanding of the aesthetics, which is, it's best described as sort of a Faustian understanding, right? Short of that, I don't like revanchism. You fight because you want a future for your people, not because the dead require you to take back something that they don't care anymore. My grandmother just wouldn't want to spill her great-grandchildren's blood taking back some city in Eastern Europe. And neither would my great-grandparents or my great-great-great-grandparents. And you fight for your people, you fight for your faith, you fight for what's right, you fight for humanity, and you fight for your people's future. You don't fight for their past. The dead need to be respected in the rituals of remembrance, but they don't get to declare wars and bank on the blood of the people who currently exist right now. That's one thing that I'm very, very adamant about in my principles. But I respect how that, letting bygones be bygones was probably used against you in the Balkans, Fotor. I think that oftentimes a lot of these bad ideas go because good ideas are abused. Like, for instance, racial tolerance has been abused to the point where in the future it will be hard to get people to believe racial tolerance is a virtue, because it will have been so often abused by cynical actors trying to cheat people out of their homes. Like, try to convince a Boer right now that, racial tolerance and anti-apartheid activism was virtuous as their country is falling apart. How are you going to do that, right? Ben White for $3 USA. Happy Black Friday and Cyber Monday. I hope you didn't splurge too much this weekend. Thinking back to the discussion on non-religious holidays, maybe these holidays are the backbone of America. You can make Black Friday a holiday over my dead body. There is no way I'm going to be part of any country whose holiday is organized around shopping, much less shopping on freaking line. This is not legitimate, okay? Think of anything other than that, right? Like, gorging yourself on turkey is a better holiday than that. I still don't know what it means outside of actually having a religious devotion, though. Anyway, guys, let's into the super chats. I have to confess being very confused about this talk. I hope you guys got something out of it, but I'm still kind of scratching my head. And I will talk with you another day, hopefully be able to get a video essay out briefly. But I'll see you guys later. Have a great, blessed rest of the week.